Hey everyone, tonight we travel back in time, not with a machine but with our imagination. Picture yourself standing on a narrow, muddy path somewhere deep in the mountains of feudal Japan. Mist, thick as smoke, clings to the ancient cedar trees, their branches heavy with moss and mystery. The air is cold, damp, and it carries a peculiar scent. A mixture of wet earth, wood smoke, and something sharp, something metallic. And through that mist, you hear a sound, a steady, rhythmic clang. It's a sound that's both violent and meditative, a heartbeat of iron on iron that echoes through the silent valleys. This is the sound of creation. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this. The romance of the past fades pretty quickly when you realize there's no central heating. The water is questionable at best, and the closest thing to entertainment is hoping a wild boar doesn't mistake you for a large, slow-moving mushroom. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The path ahead of you grows steeper, the mud sucking at your sandals. The hammering sound gets louder, more defined. It's not just a single strike, but a complex rhythm, a percussive conversation between a master and their apprentice. You see a faint orange glow filtering through the trees, a man-made sunrise in the middle of the day. As you round a final bend, the source of the sound and light reveals itself. It's not a grand workshop or a bustling factory. It's a simple, open-sided wooden structure with a thatched roof, seeming to grow right out of the mountainside. This is the forge, the kajiya, a place that is equal parts workshop, temple, and crucible. You pause at the edge of the clearing, feeling like an intruder on a sacred rite. Inside, a man moves with a focus so intense it feels like a physical force. He's dressed in simple, clean white garments, a stark contrast to the soot and smoke that fills the air. This is the master smith, the Tosho. His face is illuminated by the pulsing heart of the forge, the fire. It's not a roaring bonfire, but a contained, intensely hot bed of charcoal that seems to breathe. The smith doesn't seem to notice the cold mountain air or the sweat beating on his brow. His entire universe has shrunk to the piece of glowing steel he holds in his tongs. His apprentice, a younger boy, works the large bellows, the fuego, pushing and pulling in a steady rhythm that feeds air to the fire, making it burn with a white-hot intensity. Every movement is precise, economical, and has been practiced for generations. This is a craft from the Kamakura period, let's say around the 13th century, a time of shoguns and constant strife, which historians consider the golden age of Japanese sword-making. The demand for superior weapons fueled an incredible surge in metallurgical innovation. The smith pulls the glowing metal from the fire. He places it on the anvil, and in one fluid motion, raises his hammer. His strike is not just a display of strength, it's a calculated blow, delivered with a specific angle and force. The apprentice, anticipating the master's rhythm, strikes with a larger sledgehammer in the moments between the master's blows. Clang, 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 clang. The sound is hypnotic. It feels less like construction and more like a prayer being hammered into existence. It's a level of focus that makes your afternoon of determinedly scrolling through social media feeds feel a little, shall we say, less than productive. This place is governed by more than just physics and technique. It is steeped in Shinto belief and superstition. You notice small woven rice straw ropes, shimanoa, hanging from the eaves, marking the space as purified and sacred. This brings us to a quirky little fact. The forge was considered such a spiritually charged place that many smiths observed strict purification rituals. Some would abstain from alcohol, meat, and even contact with women for weeks leading up to the critical stages of forging a blade, believing that any impurity, physical or spiritual, could enter the steel and doom the sword. Historians still argue whether the most revered swordsmiths were treated as high-level artisans, almost like priests revered for their ability to channel the gods, or if they were seen as little more than skilled laborers with a dangerous and dirty job that placed them outside the normal social hierarchy. Perhaps the truth is a mixture of both. A grudging respect for a necessary but mysterious and frankly, terrifying craft. You look closer at the raw material they are working. It's not a clean, uniform bar of metal you might imagine. It's a rough, porous, and uneven lump, glowing with a mottled mix of orange and yellow. This is Tamahagane, or jewel steel, the legendary metal born from iron, sand, and charcoal. And it is riddled with imperfections. It's a chaotic mix of high-carbon steel, low-carbon steel, and slag. It is this inherent impurity, this wildness, that necessitates the legendary process of folding. The rhythmic hammering you're hearing is the very first step in a long, arduous journey of purification. The master isn't just shaping the metal, he's beginning a conversation with it, learning its character and coaxing it toward a state of perfection. He is preparing to fold away its flaws one layer at a time, turning this ugly, raw bloom into the soul of a samurai. The only firewall here is a delicate paper screen that does a poor job of keeping the wind out. And the only code being written is the one hammered, fold by fold, into the heart of the blade. The rhythmic hammering fades as you pull your focus back from the glowing steel. Before that rough lump of Tamahagane can be hammered, folded, and purified into a legendary blade, its journey must begin somewhere much colder, much wetter, and far more humble. Its story starts not in the heart of a fire, but in the icy flow of a mountain river. You leave the warmth of the forge behind, the mists closing in again, and you find yourself trekking downstream. The landscape is a breathtaking panorama of greens and grays, the kind of scenery that would later inspire 1,000 inkwash paintings. You follow the sound of rushing water until you arrive at a wide, shallow riverbed, where a group of figures are stooped over, their movements slow and deliberate. This is where the soul of the sword is found. You're witnessing the search for satetsu, iron sand. You step into the frigid water, the shock of the cold racing up your legs. The people here are using wide, shallow baskets and wooden planks to sift through the riverbed sediment. It's back-breaking, repetitive work. Your back is already complaining, and you haven't even filled one basket. It's the kind of manual labor that makes you deeply appreciate the future invention of the office chair. They dig into the layers of gravel and sand, then swish the mixture with water. The lighter silica sand and dirt wash away, leaving behind a residue of heavy, shimmering black particles. It's a deep, lustrous black, almost like glitter for goths. This is the precious satetsu, the essential ingredient for the steel that will one day become a katana. This reliance on iron sand is a crucial historical fact. Unlike Europe, ancient Japan had very poor access to high-quality, miniable iron ore. The islands are volcanic, rich in many resources, but large veins of easily smelted iron were not among them. So, necessity became the mother of legendary invention. Japanese smiths had to become masters of processing this less-than-ideal raw material, this fine sand washed down from the igneous rock of the mountains. The satetsu itself is primarily magnetite, a form of iron oxide. Over millennia, rain and snowmelt eroded the iron-rich mountains, carrying these heavy metallic particles down into the streams and rivers where they settled in concentrated deposits. The very process that created the iconic folding technique was born from the geological lottery Japan happened to lose. They had to find a way to smelt this sand into a usable steel bloom, and that bloom, the Tamahagane, was inherently impure, requiring the extensive purification of the fold. You watch an older man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, as he directs the others. He seems to be reading the river itself, pointing to bends and eddies where the black sand is most likely to have collected. This brings up a wonderfully quirky aspect of the process. The prospecting for satetsu was an art form, guided by experience and folklore. These prospectors, sometimes called kanashi, were geological experts of their time. They knew how the color of the surrounding clay or the type of vegetation on the riverbank could signal a rich deposit. Some stories even suggest they used dowsing-like techniques, feeling for the energy of the iron beneath the earth. They were part scientist, part mystic, searching for the dragon's treasure hidden within the mountain's bones. Historians still argue whether the legendary quality of swords from certain regions like the famous Bison or Izumo provinces was primarily due to the unique mineral composition of the local satetsu, or if it was simply a result of the generations of master smiths who refined their techniques in those areas. Was it magic in the sand, or magic in the hands of the smith? The debate lives on. The workers are meticulously separating the sand into different grades. They look for the best quality stuff, with a low phosphorus and sulfur content, as these elements are the mortal enemies of good steel, making it brittle. They're sorting sand with more care than you use to pick out ripe avocados at the supermarket. It's a testament to the level of detail required at every single stage. A mistake here using inferior sand would be a poison that travels all the way through the process, potentially causing the finished blade to crack during the final quench months later. There were no do-overs, no hitting undo. Every grain of sand mattered. As the sun begins to dip below the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the valley, the workers haul their heavy baskets of purified iron sand away from the river. They have gathered hundreds of pounds of the stuff, a mountain of black dust painstakingly filtered from a river of stone. But this is just the beginning. This sand, as precious as it is still just sand. It's a promise, a potential. To unlock the steel within it, it must be subjected to an ordeal of fire, a 3-day trial inside a massive clay furnace that will transform this cold, dead sand into a living, breathing block of jewel steel. You follow them away from the river, the heavy silence of the impending ceremony settling over the group. The next step is not one of labor, but of alchemy. The path from the river leads you to a large, cleared space, sheltered by a high roof but open to the elements on all sides. In the center of this space stands a structure that looks both ancient and unfinished. It's a monolithic block of clay, about 5 feet tall, 10 feet long, and 4 feet wide. It has a raw, earthen look to it, like a sculpture shaped by giants. This is the tatara, the dragon's breath furnace, and you've arrived in time to witness its birth and its life, a life that will last only a few fiery days before its purpose is fulfilled. Unlike the permanent stone forges of Europe, the traditional Japanese tatara is a temporary sacrificial vessel. It is built for a single smelt, and after it has given birth to the steel, it will be destroyed to free it. It is a bit like buying an incredibly complex piece of flat-pack furniture that you have to ceremonially smash to bits to get your bookshelf out. A new figure dominates this space. He is not the swordsmith from the mountain forge, but a different kind of master. This is the Mirage, the furnace master, a man whose entire life revolves around this 3-day cycle of fire and transformation. He moves around the clay structure, his hands patting the walls, his gaze analytical. His authority here is absolute. He directs a team of assistants who are completing the furnace's construction, inserting a series of bamboo and clay pipes, or fukigo, along the base of the walls. These are the lungs of the furnace, through which massive bellows will pump a continuous stream of air, feeding the fire and raising its temperature to an incredible level, well over 1,000 degrees Celsius. The Mirage is a fusion of engineer, priest, and high-stakes chef, responsible for a recipe that involves tons of raw materials and has zero margin for error. Once the Mirage is satisfied with the structure, the ceremony begins. A Shinto priest may be brought in to bless the furnace, asking the kami, the gods and spirits of the mountain and the metal, for their favor. The first fire isn't just lit, it's kindled with a sacred flame, often from a local shrine. This is a crucial historical fact. The smelting of Tamahagane was as much a religious rite as it was an industrial process. Every step was steeped in ritual designed to ensure purity and appease the spirits, because a failed smelt could mean ruin for the entire community that depended on it. With the ceremonial fire established, a small bed of charcoal is laid inside the furnace and the long vigil begins. For the next 72 hours, the clearing is a hive of constant, managed activity. The bellows operators begin their unending rhythm, a physical ordeal of endurance that will last for 3 days and 3 nights, with workers taking shifts. The furnace begins to roar, a deep, guttural sound that seems to shake the very ground you stand on. This is the dragon waking up. The Mirage watches, his face lit by the growing inferno. Then the feeding starts. A layer of charcoal is added, followed by a carefully measured layer of the black satetsu you saw being collected from the river. Then more charcoal, then more sand. This cycle will repeat every 30 minutes for the next 3 days. It's a relentless, exhausting process. No breaks, no holidays. The furnace demands to be fed, and the men are its servants. This leads to a fascinating, almost mystical element of the Mirage's craft. He doesn't have a thermometer or a gas chromatograph. His instruments are his senses. He judges the state of the smelt by the color of the flames licking out of the top of the furnace. Are they a brilliant white, a soft orange, a dangerous blue? He listens to the pitch and rhythm of the furnace's roar, a sound only he can truly interpret. He even smells the gases escaping, gauging the progress of the chemical reactions happening in the furnace's belly. It's a level of sensory expertise that is almost unimaginable today. Historians still argue whether the Mirage's almost supernatural seeming ability to read the furnace was a true intuitive gift, or the result of an incredibly refined but unwritten scientific method passed down through generations of observation. Was he a mystic whispering to a fire god, or an organic chemist without a laboratory? Inside that clay womb, a violent alchemy is taking place. The burning charcoal releases carbon monoxide, which is desperately hungry for oxygen. It strips the oxygen atoms from the iron oxide in the satetsu, leaving behind elemental iron. At these incredible temperatures, the iron melts and trickles down through the bed of charcoal, absorbing carbon as it goes. The non-metallic impurities in the sand also melt, forming a liquid slag that, being lighter, floats on top of the molten metal. This is the fundamental transformation. Sand is becoming iron, and that iron is becoming steel. After 3 sleepless days and nights, after nearly 25 tons of charcoal and iron sand have been fed into its maw, the furnace reaches its peak. It glows with an internal energy, the clay walls pulsing with heat. The roaring subsides into a deep, resonant hum. The dragon is sated. The Mirage gives the signal to stop. The bellows fall silent. The feeding ceases. An almost shocking quiet descends upon the clearing, broken only by the crackling of the cooling furnace. The work is done, but the result is still a mystery, locked inside its clay prison. Now, you must wait for the dragon to sleep, for the furnace to cool enough to be broken open, to see what treasure, or what failure, lies within. The silence that followed the 3-day roar of the furnace is heavy and thick with anticipation. A full day has passed, allowing the clay behemoth to cool from its incandescent peak to a temperature that is merely scorching. You stand with the Mirage and his weary team, their faces smudged with soot, their bodies slumped with exhaustion, but their eyes are sharp, fixed on the monolithic tatara. The air crackles not with heat but with a palpable tension. After feeding a dragon for 3 days, it is finally time to see if it has laid a golden egg or just a pile of useless slag. There's no easy open hatch or convenient access panel. There is only one way to get the steel out: brute force. The Mirage gives a sharp nod, and his men approach the furnace with heavy sledgehammers and long iron bars. The first strike against the clay wall rings out, and it feels like a sacrilege. After all the ceremony and care that went into its construction, the destruction is shockingly swift and violent. Large chunks of the hardened clay, baked to the consistency of brick, break away and crash to the ground, releasing clouds of hot dust and the lingering smell of ancient wood smoke. It's the most aggressive product unboxing you've ever witnessed. There's no delicate peeling of plastic film here. This is a full-on demolition. The men work systematically, their movements fueled by the hope of a successful smelt. They are miners, excavating a treasure they themselves created. As the front wall crumbles, you get your first glimpse of what lies within. It's not a neat rectangular ingot or a pool of liquid metal. It's a monster. A massive, uneven, vaguely mushroom-shaped slab of metal and slag that fills the entire base of the furnace. This is the Kira, the raw bloom of steel born from the smelt. It's a chaotic landscape of textures and colors. Patches of dull charcoal gray are fused to areas of glistening crystalline silver, all of it veined with glassy black slag. It weighs several tons, a solid mass of potential that is still hot enough to radiate a visible shimmer in the air. The Mirage steps closer, his face unreadable as he studies the bloom. A collective breath is held. Then he points to a specific section where the metal has a bright silvery appearance. A small, knowing smile touches his lips. The tension in the air breaks, replaced by quiet murmurs of relief and satisfaction. This brings us to a crucial historical fact about this process. The Kira is not homogeneous. It's a geological cross-section of steel quality. The very best steel, the high-carbon Tamahagane suitable for a sword's edge, forms in only certain parts of the bloom where the temperature and carbon absorption were absolutely perfect. Below it, you'll find lower carbon, more ductile steel called hocho-tetsu, useful for the sword's core. And at the very bottom, there's often high-carbon cast iron, or zuku, which is too brittle for a sword but can be used for other tools. The success of a smelt is judged by how much high-quality Tamahagane it yields, and this one, it seems, is a success. Now the real heavy lifting begins. Using massive levers, the team pries the multi-ton kira from the ruins of the furnace. The moment it's free, they attack it with sledgehammers, striking it while it's still hot enough to be somewhat brittle. The goal is to break it into smaller, manageable pieces for inspection. Each ringing blow is a test, and the sound the metal makes as it fractures tells the experienced ear a story about its carbon content. It's a quirky tidbit of the craft that these men, who couldn't read a chemical assay if you gave them one, could accurately grade steel by sound alone. A high-carbon piece would ring with a clear, high-pitched note, while a lower carbon piece would give a duller, deeper thud. The swordsmith has arrived from his mountain forge, his clean white robes a stark contrast to the grimy smelters. He and the Mirage now perform the most important task, grading the steel. They pick up the broken chunks, some the size of your fist, others as large as your head. They examine the fractured surfaces in the sunlight. The best Tamahagane fragments sparkle with a coarse crystalline structure, like broken sugar cubes made of light. This is why it's called jewel steel. Its beauty is a direct indicator of its quality. Historians still argue whether the subtle variations in smelting technique, like the precise angle of the air pipes or the rhythm of adding sand and charcoal, were considered proprietary secrets belonging to a specific school or clan of smiths, or if this knowledge was more of a regional standard, shared among the craftsmen of a particular province. You watch as the smith selects the finest pieces of Tamahagane, his hands moving with reverence. These are the chosen ones. They are ugly, jagged lumps of raw metal, but to him they are more precious than gold. He is choosing the fragments that will form the ha, the razor-sharp cutting edge of the sword. He also selects pieces of the tougher, lower carbon hocho-tetsu, which will become the shingan, the soft core that will give the blade its resilience. It's like a chef selecting his prime ingredients before beginning a masterpiece. He has no interest in the slag or the cast iron. Those are byproducts. He is here only for the jewel. Once the selection is complete, the chosen steel is weighed and paid for. The rest will be used for less demanding applications, like knives or farm tools. This carefully selected pile of jagged, silvery rocks is the culmination of the river, the mountain, the clay, and the fire. Its ordeal is over. Now its purification is about to begin. You follow the swordsmith, who now carries the heavy, chosen pieces of Tamahagane in a straw basket. The journey back up the mountain path is a quiet one. The boisterous, communal energy of the smelting site, with its dozens of workers and its 3-day roar, fades behind you. As you climb, the air grows still again. The only sounds the crunch of your feet on the path and the distant call of a bird. You are returning to a different world, a world of singular focus. You arrive back at the simple wooden structure with the thatched roof, the smith's personal sanctuary. This time you don't linger at the edge of the clearing. You follow him inside. Crossing the threshold is like entering a temple dedicated to fire and steel. The inside is surprisingly clean and orderly. The earthen floor is swept bare and every tool hangs in its designated place on the wooden walls or rests on a simple shelf. There is none of the chaotic clutter you might associate with a workshop. There are no piles of discarded projects or random bits of scrap metal lying about. It makes your own garage with its mysterious collection of half-empty paint cans and that one socket wrench you can never find seem utterly profane by comparison. The air smells of cool charcoal, old wood, and the faint, clean scent of quenching water. Light filters through the open sides of the building, creating long, dramatic shadows that dance with the smith's movements. This is a space designed not just for work, but for concentration. Your eyes are drawn to the tools. They are the heart of this sanctuary, second only to the forge fire itself. There's the anvil, the kanatoko, a solid, square block of polished steel that seems to absorb the light. It's not a massive Western-style anvil, but a smaller, more intimate block set into the earth. Beside it rests a collection of hammers, the suchi, with long wooden handles and heads of various shapes and weights. They are worn smooth from a lifetime of use, the handles stained dark with sweat and oil. The tongs, or yatoko, hang in a neat row, their jaws shaped for holding metal of different sizes. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky and essential belief. To the smith, these are not just inanimate objects. According to Shinto belief, powerful kami can inhabit not just natural wonders, but also man-made items that are created and used with great skill and reverence. The smith's tools are his partners. He knows the personality of each hammer, the precise grip of each pair of tongs. They are extensions of his own body and spirit, and he treats them with a respect that borders on worship. This reverence for the tools is a key historical fact of the swordsmith's life. An apprentice, or deishi, might spend his first several years doing nothing but cleaning the forge, managing the charcoal fire, and learning to hammer rice straw to develop a consistent rhythm. He would not be allowed to touch the precious steel, but he would be responsible for cleaning and maintaining the master's tools, learning their balance and their spirit through care and observation. It was the world's most demanding, and probably unpaid, internship. Only after years of this humble service would he be allowed to begin learning the true secrets of the craft. Historians still argue whether this deep reverence for tools was a purely spiritual Shinto practice, a way of honoring the kami within them, or if it was a highly practical form of respect that ensured the meticulous maintenance of the vital equipment upon which the smith's livelihood and reputation depended. Perhaps like the sword itself, it was both, a perfect fusion of the spiritual and the practical. The master smith moves through this space with a quiet grace. He dons his clean white work clothes and ties a cloth around his forehead. He says a silent prayer before the kamidana, a small household shrine you now notice tucked high up in the eaves of the roof. He is purifying himself, preparing his mind and body for the immense focus that is required. He cannot be angry, or distracted, or impatient. The steel will feel it. His mood will be forged directly into the blade. He doesn't just need to be a master craftsman. He needs to be a master of his own mind. Hitting your thumb with a hammer you believe has a spirit inside it must create a very complicated set of emotions. He kneels before the forge hearth, the hodo. With practiced hands, he arranges the pine charcoal, creating a carefully shaped bed. He lights it, and using the large box-like bellows, he begins to breathe life into the fire. The charcoal catches, and soon it's glowing with a soft orange heat. The sanctuary is now complete. The fire is lit. The tools are ready. The smith is focused. He takes one of the ugly, jagged pieces of Tamahagane, that precious jewel steel you saw him select from the wreckage of the tatara, and with a pair of long tongs, he gently places it into the heart of the fire. The first step of a 1,000-mile journey has begun. The raw steel, born of sand and a 3-day inferno, is about to be tamed. The piece of jewel steel sits in the bed of glowing charcoal, slowly absorbing the energy of the fire. You watch as its dull, rocky exterior begins to transform. A faint red blush appears, then deepens to a cherry glow, then brightens to a vibrant, almost cheerful orange. The smith uses his tongs to turn the piece, ensuring it heats evenly. He is watching the color with an eagle's eye, a human pyrometer gauging a temperature of around 900 degrees Celsius. When it reaches the perfect shade of yellowish orange, he lifts it from the forge in a single, fluid motion. A shower of tiny, glittering sparks follows it through the air, a fleeting constellation against the forge's shadows. He places the glowing chunk on the anvil, and the hammering begins. This is not the rhythmic, conversational hammering you heard from the mountain path. This is a more brutal, percussive assault. His goal isn't refinement, not yet. It is consolidation. The raw Tamahagane is porous, almost like a metallic sponge, full of voids and slag inclusions. His first task is to beat this porosity out of existence, to hammer the rough chunk into a flattened, solid patty of steel. Clang, clang, clang. The blows are heavy, forceful, and you can feel the shock wave through the earthen floor. Each strike sends a volcanic eruption of orange sparks into the air, and the metal visibly compresses and spreads like a very, very stubborn piece of dough. As he works, the smith's entire body is attuned to the feedback he is receiving. This is where the true artistry begins, an act of sensory genius. He can feel the steel's character through the handle of his hammer. A piece with a higher carbon content will feel harder, more resistant, offering a crisp reverberation. A lower carbon piece will feel softer, more yielding under the blow. It's like trying to determine the ripeness of a cantaloupe by tapping it, except the cantaloupe is on fire, and getting it wrong could ruin a month's work. The sound is also a critical indicator. The high carbon steel rings with a clear, almost musical note, while the softer steel responds with a duller, heavier thud. He is listening to the metal's song, and from its melody he can determine its destiny. He works through the selected pieces one by one, heating and flattening them. After hammering each piece, he sets it aside to cool, creating a small collection of rough metallic pancakes. He is sorting them as he goes, placing the harder, high-carbon pieces in one pile and the softer, tougher pieces in another. He's performing a metallurgical analysis using nothing but his senses, a skill honed over a lifetime of repetition. This initial, critical sorting process, known as oroshigane, is a vital historical fact. Without it, he would be unable to construct the complex, laminated billet that gives the katana its unique properties. He must know intimately the nature of every single piece of steel before he even thinks about joining them together. Now you see him do something curious. He takes one of the flattened patties, but before reheating it, he wraps it in a piece of rice paper. Then he dips it into a thin, watery slurry of clay and straw ash. This is a wonderfully quirky technique. The paper is there to hold the clay mixture in place, and when it's thrust into the forge, the paper will instantly vaporize, leaving a thin, protective ceramic coating on the steel. This coating helps to prevent excessive oxidation, the formation of scale, and acts as a flux, a chemical cleaning agent that will help the different pieces of steel weld together more cleanly. He is essentially giving the steel a little clay spa treatment before subjecting it to the trauma of a forge weld. With several pieces coated and heated to a brilliant, almost white-hot temperature, so bright you have to squint to look at it, he performs the next crucial step, tsumi wakashi, or the stacking, or he quickly stacks the heated patties on top of one another on a long steel handle, creating a rough layered block. Hard steel, soft steel, hard steel. He is building the basic DNA of the blade. This block is then returned to the fire and heated again, this time to a true welding temperature over 1300 degrees Celsius. This is where the secret ingredients in that clay slurry come into play. Historians still argue whether the warabai, the straw ash in the slurry, was used just for its binding properties, or if smiths knew that its high silica and carbon content would actively help the weld, lowering the melting point of the impurities so they could be squeezed out more easily. It was the original secret sauce, a proprietary blend of mud and ash that made all the difference. The smith pulls the shimmering, dripping block from the fire. For a moment it looks alive, a captured piece of the sun. He brings it to the anvil, and with a series of powerful, rapid blows, he strikes the block. The result is a spectacular explosion of liquid fire. The molten slag and impurities trapped between the layers are violently ejected in a shower of white-hot sparks. The force of the hammer blow fuses the individual patties into a single, unified block of steel. The noise is immense. The light is blinding. It's a level of intensity that makes your most stressful day at the office feel like a quiet nap. The smith has tamed the raw bloom. He has taken a collection of disparate, jagged, impure rocks and forged them, through fire and violence and incredible skill, into a single solid billet. This rough, ugly block of steel now contains all the potential of the finished blade. Its journey of purification, the sacred act of folding, is about to begin. The rough welded block of steel, now a single entity, cools on the anvil's edge. It's a victory, but a minor one. You can see the faint lines where the different patties were joined, a testament to its composite nature. It is solid, but it is not yet whole. It's a Frankenstein's monster of steel, bolted together with fire and force. To you, it might look like a finished product, a solid bar of metal. To the smith, it is a lump of chaotic potential, an unmixed batter full of lumps. The high-carbon steel and low-carbon steel are still in their respective, uncooperative neighborhoods within the block. If he were to try and shape this into a sword now, the blade would have hard spots that could shatter and soft spots that wouldn't hold an edge. It would be a failure. And so the billet is returned to the fire. Once again, it is heated to that familiar bright orange yellow. The smith's movements are now different. His goal is no longer consolidation, but elongation. He places the glowing block on the anvil and begins hammering it, but not just down. He strikes it with angled, strategic blows, encouraging it to stretch, to grow longer and thinner. He works in a steady rhythm, turning the bar, hammering its sides, keeping its rectangular shape as it extends. It's a process that requires a delicate balance of force and control, a bit like trying to roll out a perfect pizza base. Only this one weighs 10 pounds and would instantly set your entire kitchen on fire. When the bar has been drawn out to about double its original length, the smith lays down his hammer and picks up a tool that looks like a blunt chisel, the Tamahagane. He places the glowing bar on the anvil, and with a few swift taps of a small hammer, he scores a deep line across the middle of the bar. It's not a cut designed to sever, but an indentation, a suggestion, a crease. This groove is the pivot point for the entire process that will follow. He then returns the scored bar to the forge, this time bringing it to that shimmering, almost liquid welding heat. You hold your breath as he pulls it from the fire. In one smooth, practiced motion, he brings the bar to the anvil, places the scored line over the edge, and using his hammer, he folds the bar perfectly in half, back onto itself, like closing a book made of lava. He has taken one long bar and turned it into a shorter, thicker bar of two distinct layers. This simple, almost underwhelming action is the legendary first fold. It's the sacred act that begins the true purification. Without a single word, the smith immediately begins hammering the folded end, his blows now sharp, percussive, and fast. You see another one of those spectacular explosions of sparks as the two layers are forced to become one. The molten flux and any trapped air or impurities are violently ejected, and the two halves forge weld together into a new, solid block. This is the central historical fact, the very reason for this entire ritual. The fold begins the process of homogenization. That original, chaotic block of steel is being mechanically mixed. By folding it, the smith has taken all the internal inconsistencies and stacked them. Where there was one layer of lumpy steel, there are now two. He will draw it out again and fold it again, creating 4 layers, then 8, then 16, and so on. With every fold, the individual strata of high and low carbon steel are stretched thinner and layered more and more densely. He is quite literally creating the grain of the steel, just as a baker kneads dough to distribute yeast. This brings us to a quirky aspect of the smith's incredible skill. How does he know the weld is sound? He watches the seam. As he hammers the two folded halves together at welding heat, the visible line between them begins to fade and then vanishes completely into the uniform glow of the metal. It's a visual signal that the two have become one. Another clue is the sound. The initial blows on the two-layered piece have a slightly hollow, deadened sound, but as the weld takes hold, the ringing note of the anvil becomes clearer, more solid, a pure tone that tells him the steel is now a single unified block. Historians still argue whether the initial stacking of the various steel grades was considered more important for the blade's final character, or if the first few folds were seen as the truly transformative step where the smith's skill could correct or enhance the raw materials he started with. Was it about the recipe of the initial stack, or the technique of the mixing? The process seems deceptively simple when you watch it, but the level of judgment required is immense. Heat the steel too much and it will burn, sparking violently and losing precious carbon, rendering it useless. Don't heat it enough, and the weld will fail, creating a fatal flaw, an invisible pocket of air or slag that will remain hidden until the blade shatters during the final quench. There is no undo button, no way to go back. Every action is permanent. It has a level of commitment that makes sending an email you immediately regret seem like a minor inconvenience. The smith has now created a new billet, one that is twice as uniform as the one he started with. But it is still nowhere near perfect. He will repeat this process, heating, drawing out, folding, and welding, again and again and again. The first fold is complete. The long meditative dance of the 16,000 layers has just begun. The newly folded and welded block of steel, glowing a dull red, is thrust back into the fiery heart of the forge. The apprentice pumps the bellows, and the charcoal brightens, bathing the smith's focused face in a warm, orange light. As you watch the metal begin its journey back to welding heat, a fundamental question bubbles up in your mind. Why all this effort? Why this obsessive, repetitive dance of folding? You understand the need to squeeze out the visible impurities, the slag you saw fly out like fireworks. But the smith isn't just cleaning the steel, he's mixing it. And what he's mixing is something you can't even see, an invisible, fickle partner named carbon. Let's pause the action for a moment and look at this on a microscopic level. Imagine the metal in its purest form, just iron. The iron atoms are arranged in a neat, orderly crystal lattice, like perfectly stacked oranges at a grocery store. If you were to push on this stack, the layers could slide past each other fairly easily. This is why pure iron is relatively soft and ductile. You can bend it, shape it, but it won't hold a sharp edge, and it doesn't have that springy resilience we associate with steel. It's a bit too agreeable for its own good, like a friend who will never help you move because they don't want to be a bother. Now, enter carbon. During the smelting process in the tatara, the iron sand was infused with carbon from the mountains of charcoal it was buried with. Now imagine taking a few tiny, hard marbles, our carbon atoms, and shoving them into the spaces between those perfectly stacked oranges. The neat layers are now distorted, disrupted. The oranges can't slide past each other so easily anymore because the marbles are wedged in there, creating tension and strain. This is, in a very simplified nutshell, what makes steel. A tiny amount of carbon, less than 2% by weight, infiltrates the iron's crystal structure, locking it in place and making it dramatically harder and stronger. This is the central scientific fact that underpins this entire craft. Carbon transforms soft iron into hard steel. It's the secret ingredient, the magic dust. But here's the problem. The Tamahagane born from the tatara is a mess. It's not a uniform steel. In some spots, it might have a perfect 1% carbon, ideal for a blade's edge. But just a millimeter away, it could have a very low carbon content, making it soft iron. And a millimeter from there, it might have over 4% carbon, which makes it brittle cast iron, the kind of stuff that shatters like glass. So the initial block the smith created is a chunky, uneven fruitcake of different carbon concentrations. The folding is how he mixes that fruitcake, turning the chunks of fruit and nuts into a fine, even-textured batter, where every single slice will be perfect. He is trying to distribute those carbon marbles as evenly as possible throughout the entire stack of iron oranges. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky bit of historical forensics. How did ancient smiths, without any knowledge of atomic theory, know how much carbon was in their steel? One of the most effective methods was the spark test. A smith could take a piece of steel and touch it to a grinding stone. By observing the shower of sparks, he could make an astonishingly accurate guess at the carbon content. Low-carbon iron produces long, straight sparks that are reddish-orange. As the carbon content increases, the sparks become shorter, brighter, and they burst into complex, star-like patterns. It was a simple, immediate, and surprisingly precise method of chemical analysis. He was reading the steel's fiery signature, a language written in light. The smith is now pulling the steel from the fire, ready for the second fold. You can see the knowledge isn't just in his head, it's in his hands, his eyes, his ears. Historians still argue whether the master swordsmiths of this era had a conceptual understanding of carbon as a distinct substance that infused the iron, or if their understanding was more alchemical and spiritual. Did they believe they were managing a physical ingredient, or did they perceive it as imbuing the metal with the chi or life force of the fire and charcoal? They might have spoken of giving the steel spirit or character, not of managing its carbon percentage. The result was the same, but the philosophy behind it might have been worlds away from our modern, clinical understanding of metallurgy. He draws the bar out, scores it, and folds it again. Clang. The hammer falls, welding 4 layers into one. He's just taken another huge step toward homogeneity. The carbon is being distributed more and more evenly, the internal structure becoming finer and more complex. It's an exhausting, painstaking process of dilution and distribution. It's not about adding something new. It's about perfectly arranging what is already there. It's like trying to mix a single drop of food coloring into a gallon of water using nothing but a tiny spoon. It takes time, patience, and a whole lot of repetitive motion. And with every fold, the steel gets a little closer to perfection, a little closer to being worthy of a samurai's hands. The block of steel, now 4 layers thick, is once again heating in the charcoal. The smith is still managing that invisible partner, carbon, but you now turn your attention to the other enemy hiding within the steel, the dross. While carbon is a welcome, if difficult, guest, the dross is a collection of unwanted squatters that must be evicted with extreme prejudice. This dross is the slag, the non-metallic leftovers from the smelting process. Think of it as the grit, the ash, the rocky impurities that were mixed in with the original iron sand and didn't get fully separated in the tatara. They are microscopic pockets of glassy silica and other minerals trapped within the steel structure. If these impurities remain, they create weak points. A blade with slag inclusions is a blade that will chip, crack, or even shatter under stress. So, while one half of the folding process is about mixing the carbon evenly, the other, equally important half, is about physically squeezing the junk out. The smith pulls the glowing bar from the fire. As he lays it on the anvil and begins to hammer, you see another one of those brilliant, violent bursts of light. But this time, you're not just seeing sparks. You are seeing the eviction notice being served. That fiery spray is the liquefied slag being forcibly ejected from between the layers of steel. It's a cleaning method that probably wouldn't work on that coffee stain on your favorite shirt, but for incandescent steel, it's perfect. This is the critical historical reason for the hammering that accompanies each fold. The bloomery steel produced in the tatara is fundamentally dirty. Unlike modern steelmaking, where iron is fully melted into a liquid and the lighter slag conveniently floats to the top to be skimmed off, the kira forms in a semi-solid state. This means the slag is trapped inside, like bits of nutshell in a thick brownie batter. There is no way to simply melt it and skim it. The only way to get it out is to heat the steel until the slag inclusions melt into a liquid state, and then use the percussive force of the hammer to physically press them out to the edges and expel them. Each hammer blow is like wringing out a sponge, and the slag is the dirty water. The smith works the 4-layered bar, drawing it out once more. The floor around the anvil isn't just dirt. It's a geological record of every blade ever forged here, paved with microscopic beads of ejected slag. He scores the bar, coats it in that watery mix of clay and straw ash, and returns it to the fire. Let's talk more about that slurry, because it's a fantastically quirky piece of ancient chemistry. The ash from rice straw, warabai, is incredibly rich in silica. By coating the steel in it, the smith is intentionally adding a substance that acts as a flux. A flux is a cleaning agent that, at high temperatures, helps to dissolve oxides and lowers the melting point of the slag. It's the metallurgical equivalent of a fancy degreaser, a secret formula of mud and ash that would make a late-night infomercial host weep with joy. It makes the trapped impurities more fluid, more slippery, and thus much easier to squeeze out during the hammer weld. He pulls the steel from the fire, now ready for the 3rd fold. He bends it back on itself, 8 layers. He hammers it, and again the forge is lit up by a shower of dross. But you notice something. The spray is finer this time, the sparks less numerous. This is the sign of progress. The steel is getting cleaner. With every fold, there are fewer impurities left to expel. The smith is not just a brute forcing metal into shape. He is a purifier, meticulously cleansing the steel, one fold at a time. The choice of fuel is also part of this purification. Historians still argue whether the universal choice of pine charcoal or matsuzumi was purely for its ability to produce a clean, consistent heat, or if master smiths knew that its specific low ash, low sulfur composition was crucial for preventing the introduction of new impurities back into the very steel they were trying to purify. They were fighting a war on 2 fronts, removing the original dross while being careful not to add any new contaminants from their own fire. He draws the 8-layered bar out, folds it, 16 layers, then 32. The process repeats, becoming a hypnotic dance of fire, steel, and hammer. The initial violence of consolidating the raw bloom has given way to a focused, rhythmic process of refinement. The explosions of sparks have become smaller, more delicate sprays. The steel itself seems to glow with a cleaner, more uniform light. It is being fundamentally transformed. Its chaotic, rocky nature is being hammered and burned away, replaced by a structure of immense complexity and purity. The dross, the unwanted baggage from its fiery birth in the tatara, has been almost entirely cast out. The steel is now clean. Now the goal shifts from cleaning and initial mixing to the almost unbelievable task of creating thousands upon thousands of layers, a process that will take the smith from a craftsman to a meditating artist. The steel is now clean. The frantic, violent explosions of slag have ceased. The battle for purification is over, and now a different, more profound phase of the work begins. The goal is no longer subtraction, but multiplication. The process you have been witnessing, the heating, the drawing out, the scoring, the folding, and the welding, continues, but its character has changed. The raw force of the initial stages has mellowed into a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The smith's movements are a study in economy and grace, a cycle of action repeated so many times that it has become as natural as breathing. This is no longer a fight, it's a meditation. He takes the bar, now perhaps 32 layers thick, and places it back in the fire. The apprentice works the bellows, the soft whoosh of air being the only sound besides the crackle of the charcoal. The smith doesn't seem to be consciously thinking about his next action anymore. His body knows the steps, the same way your fingers know the keys of a password you've typed 1,000 times. He is in a state of flow, a deep concentration that shuts out the outside world. The misty mountains, the chill in the air, your own quiet presence. None of it exists for him. There is only the fire, the steel, and the hammer. This is the ultimate single tasking, an absolute rebuke to our modern world of a dozen open tabs and constant notifications. He pulls the steel out, draws it to length, scores it, folds it. It now has 64 layers. He hammers it, the two halves becoming one with a clean, solid ring. Back into the fire it goes. This repetitive cycle brings us to a critical, almost counterintuitive historical fact. With every heating, the steel is losing a little bit of itself. Each time the billet is brought to a bright orange or yellow heat, the oxygen in the air reacts with the surface, burning off a small amount of carbon in a process called decarburization. The smith is acutely aware of this. He started with very high carbon steel, knowing that this long repetitive process would slowly and steadily reduce the overall carbon content. He is effectively cooking the steel, reducing it down to a perfect final concentration of about 0.6%, the sweet spot for a sword's edge, offering extreme hardness without being overly brittle. He is aiming for a moving target, and only experience tells him when he has arrived. The process is repeated. 128 layers, 256, 512. The smith seems to enter a trance-like state, what Japanese martial artists and Zen practitioners would call mushin, or no mind. This is the quirky and beautiful heart of the craft. It's a state where the conscious, analytical mind quiets down and action becomes pure, intuitive, and immediate. He isn't thinking, I must now strike the steel with precisely this much force. He simply strikes and the force is correct. His entire being is focused on the feedback from the metal, the sound it makes, the color of its glow, the resistance he feels through the hammer. It's an intimate conversation without words, a physical empathy with the object he is creating. 1,024 layers. The bar is getting smaller, denser with each fold as a little material is lost to scale. 2,048, 4,096. Historians still argue whether the final number of folds was a rigidly prescribed formula, dictated by the traditions of a particular school of swordsmithing, or if it was an intuitive judgment call made by the master. Would a smith of the Soshu school always fold the steel 14 times because that was the rule, or would he assess the specific billet of Tamahagane and decide based on its feel and character that this particular piece needed one more fold or one less? Was he following a strict recipe, or was he improvising a symphony based on the instrument in his hands? 8,192 layers, 16,384. The numbers become almost abstract, impossible to visualize. You are looking at a solid bar of steel, Yet you know that within it lies a hidden universe of more than 16,000 individual strata, each one thinner than a human hair, all perfectly welded together. The process is the ultimate high-stakes workout. No music, no trainer yelling at you, just the steady rhythm of a heavy hammer and a partner that weighs 10 pounds and is hot enough to melt glass. The smith makes it look effortless, but you can see the coiled tension in his shoulders, the years of developed strength in his arms and back. After about 15 folds, he stops. The meditative dance is over. He places the final billet, a dense, compact bar of steel, on the anvil to cool. It looks almost identical to the block he started with after the first weld, but it is a world away in its internal perfection. The steel is now pure, homogeneous, and possesses a subtle layered grain that, after polishing, will be its signature and its soul. The foundation has been laid. Now it is time to build the blade. The smith places the final compact billet of steel on the anvil to cool. It's a dense, dark rectangle of metal, unremarkable to the untrained eye. It looks solid. It looks simple. Yet you've just been told that this unassuming block contains over 16,000 layers. Let's be honest, your brain just blue-screened trying to comprehend that. How can a solid object, something you could hold in your hand, contain a structure of such immense complexity? This brings us to a crucial point, a myth that has become so widespread, it's practically a fact in pop culture, and it's right there in the title of our journey tonight. The idea that a swordsmith folded the steel 15,000 times, that is respectfully a complete misunderstanding of the process. It's a myth. He didn't fold it thousands of times. If he did, he'd still be working on his first blade, having started sometime shortly after the dinosaurs checked out. The truth is far more elegant and, frankly, far more intelligent. The smith didn't perform thousands of actions. He performed a few actions that had thousands of results. It's all down to the beautiful, relentless power of exponential growth. It's the same principle that makes a good piece of gossip spread through an office in an hour, or turns one funny cat video into a global phenomenon. Let's do the math. It's simple, I promise. You start with your solid block of steel. That's one layer. The smith draws it out and folds it in half. You now have 2 layers. He welds those together, draws it out again, and folds that. Now how many layers do you have? Not 3, you have 4. You've doubled the previous number. He folds that 4-layered bar and you get 8 layers. Fold it again and you get 16, then 32, then 64. You see the pattern. It's not addition. It's multiplication by 2 every single time. The formula is simply 2 to the power of n, where n is the number of times the smith actually performs the physical act of folding. This is the central historical fact that gets lost in translation. The smith we have been watching perform this meditative dance of folding and welding about 14 or 15 times. Let's see what that actually means. 2 to the power of 10 is 1,024. So after just 10 folds, you already have over 1,000 layers. At 12 folds, you have 4,096 layers. And at 14 folds, you have 16,384 layers. So the smith, by performing just 14 simple folds, has created a bar of steel with an internal structure of more than 16,000 distinct strata. It's an act of profound efficiency. He created a universe of complexity with just a handful of controlled, repeated actions. This leads to a wonderfully quirky scientific limitation that the smiths discovered through centuries of trial and error. What happens if you just keep going? If 15 folds is good, wouldn't 20 be better? That would give you over 1 million layers. 25 folds would give you over 33 million. But at a certain point, you hit a wall of diminishing returns. As the layers get thinner and thinner, they approach the microscopic, almost the atomic scale. When you heat this incredibly fine-grained steel, something called carbon diffusion happens. The carbon atoms no longer stay in their respective high and low carbon layers. They just start to migrate across the boundaries, evening everything out into a homogeneous soup. In other words, if you fold it too many times, you actually erase the very layered structure you were trying to create. The ancient smiths intuitively found the sweet spot, somewhere between 12 and 16 folds, that maximized the layers without destroying them. They knew, without knowing the science, when to stop. When you read ancient texts that describe a legendary blade as having 1,000 layered steel, or a wood grain pattern, historians still argue whether these were poetic descriptions meant to convey the immense effort and quality of the blade, or if they represented a more literal, albeit simplified understanding of this exponential process. They might not have done the math on a scroll, but they knew that a few folds resulted in a 1,000-layer complexity. So the next time you hear someone say a katana was folded thousands of times, you can give them a knowing, gentle smile. You know the secret. The genius wasn't in the mindless repetition of an action, but in understanding the explosive power of that action. The billet lying there on the anvil isn't a testament to 1,000 folds, but to the elegant, compounding power of a dozen. It's now a perfect unified foundation. But a foundation is not a house, and this dense, layered block is not yet a sword. The next step is where the true identity of the katana is born, where the smith will combine different types of this carefully prepared steel to create a blade that is both incredibly hard and miraculously flexible. The billet of highly folded steel rests on the anvil, its internal universe of 16,000 layers hidden from view. You might think this is it. This is the steel that will be hammered into a sword. But the genius of the Japanese swordsmith is not just in creating this one perfect material. It's in knowing that even this material has its limits. A sword made entirely from this high-carbon steel would be incredibly hard. It could be sharpened to a legendary razor-like edge, but it would also be brittle. Under the stress of a powerful blow, or if it struck another weapon or a piece of armor in just the wrong way, it could snap like a shard of glass. A broken sword is not just a failed tool, it's a death sentence for the samurai who wields it. On the other hand, if the smith were to use a softer, lower carbon steel, the blade would be incredibly tough and resilient. You could bend it, and it would spring back. It would absorb the shock of impact without breaking, but it would be too soft to hold a fine edge. It would dull quickly in battle, becoming little more than a gracefully shaped metal club. The smith is faced with a classic engineering dilemma: hardness versus toughness. You can have one or you can have the other, but in a single, homogeneous piece of steel, you cannot have both in their ideal forms. So, what did these ancient masters of metallurgy do? They cheated. They refused to choose. They decided to use both. This is the genius of lamination, the secret of the katana's soft heart. The smith now turns his attention away from the folded billet and picks up another simpler bar of steel. This is the shingane, or core steel. It might be a piece of the lower carbon hocho tetsu from the tatara, or perhaps a bar that has only been folded a few times, just enough to work out the worst of the impurities, but not enough to make it hard and brittle. This is the tough, shock-absorbing soul of the sword. The highly folded billet he just spent hours creating, that is the kawagane, the skin steel or river steel. That is the hard, beautiful, razor-sharp exterior. He is going to combine them, wrapping the hard skin around the soft core, creating a blade with a dual nature. The process is an act of mechanical origami. The smith heats the precious, multi-layered kawagane and carefully hammers it into a long, U-shaped channel, like a gutter made of star stuff. He then takes the shingane, the soft core steel, and forges it into a bar that fits snugly inside this channel. It's like making the world's most dangerous and demanding hot dog. He has to get the proportions just right. Too much core steel, and the hard cutting edge will be too thin and weak. Too little, and the blade loses its shock-absorbing properties. It's a bit like trying to make a perfect burrito. You need just the right amount of filling so the tortilla doesn't break. But this tortilla is 1300 degrees Celsius, and getting it wrong means starting over from scratch. This specific technique of inserting a soft core into a U-shaped hard skin is called kobuse, and it's a key historical fact that this was one of the most common, but by no means the only method of blade construction. Smiths developed a wide variety of lamination patterns. Some used a three-piece sandwich, or sanmai, with a hard steel core and softer steel sides. The most masterly smiths could create incredibly complex assemblies like shihozume, which used 4 separate pieces: a hard-edged steel, softer side steels, and a soft core steel, all meticulously forge-welded into a single, cohesive whole. Each method had its own strengths and was often a closely guarded secret of a particular school. With the soft core nested inside the hard skin, the smith hammers the top of the U shut, completely encasing the shingane within the kawagane. He now has a composite bar, a single billet with two soles. This brings us to a scholarly debate that continues to this day. Was the primary motivation for this complex lamination purely for performance, a way to achieve the perfect balance of a hard edge and a tough spine? Or was it also driven by economics? The high-carbon Tamahagane was incredibly labor-intensive to produce and refine. Was lamination also a clever way to conserve this precious, expensive material for the outside of the blade where it was needed most, while using cheaper, less refined iron for the hidden core? As with so many things in this craft, the answer is likely a pragmatic and elegant both. The smith now takes this composite bar and brings it to a perfect welding heat. This is a moment of immense skill. He has to ensure the entire block is at a uniform temperature, so that the hard skin and soft core will fuse perfectly. He pulls it from the fire and, with a series of quick, confident blows, he welds the seam shut. He hammers the bar, compressing it, bonding the two different types of steel into one inseparable whole. There can be no gaps, no air pockets, no flaws at the boundary between hard and soft. He has created a new entity. This bar, which looks no different from the outside than the one he started with, now has a secret. It has a hard, lethal exterior and a soft, resilient heart. Now, and only now, is he ready to draw out the sword's form. The composite billet, a single bar with a secret heart of soft steel, is now the sole focus of the smith's attention. The long meditative process of folding is finished. The period of creation through multiplication is over. Now begins the act of creation through reduction and shaping. The goal is no longer to build complexity within the steel, but to draw that complexity out into a new, elegant form. The billet is placed into the forge and heated, not to a dripping, white-hot welding temperature, but to a bright, malleable orange. The journey from a rectangular block to a long, slender blade is about to be hammered into existence. The smith pulls the glowing bar from the fire. The work that follows is called hizukuri, which translates to making with fire. This is the fundamental forging of the blade's shape, and it is a breathtaking display of percussive artistry. The smith doesn't just flatten the bar. He coaxes it, persuades it, stretches it with a series of incredibly precise hammer blows. He uses different faces of his hammer and different parts of the anvil to control the metal's flow. It's like sculpting in clay, except your clay is a bar of incandescent steel and your hands are a 10-pound hammer. No pressure. This process is a critical historical fact and the true test of a smith's shaping skill. He begins at one end, hammering the billet to draw it out into a long rectangular bar. With every strike, he must be mindful of the sword's hidden anatomy. He has to stretch the hard outer skin and the soft inner core at the same rate. If he were to hammer too aggressively on one side, he could make the hard kawagane dangerously thin, or even expose the soft shingane beneath. It would be like stretching a balloon animal too far in one spot. The integrity is lost and the whole thing is ruined. A mistake here could render the entire laminated structure pointless. As the bar gets longer and thinner, you see the smith begin to define the different parts of the blade. With angled blows, he starts to form the thick, strong spine, the mune. With lighter, flatter blows, he establishes the plane that will eventually become the razor-sharp edge, the hay. He works his way down the length of the steel, a section at a time, heating and hammering, heating and hammering. The blade grows before your eyes, extending from the original block like a metallic plant growing in fast motion. This is also where he forges the tip, the kisaki, one of the most complex and defining features of a katana, carefully shaping the point where the edge curves up to meet the spine. It's a level of three-dimensional control that makes trying to ice a cake without getting frosting all over the counter seem like child's play. Here we come to a fascinating and quirky aspect of the smith's foresight. You know that the katana has an elegant, distinctive curve, the sori. While the most dramatic part of that curve is created during the final quenching process, the smith is already laying the groundwork for it now. As he forges the blade's shape, he can introduce a very slight, almost imperceptible preliminary curve. He does this by hammering the spine of the blade slightly more than the edge. This compresses the steel along the back, encouraging the blade to bend gently forward, edge side up. He is essentially giving the steel a suggestion, a memory of the shape it is destined to take. It's a bit of metallurgical foreshadowing. The result of all this fire and hammering is a long, sword-shaped object known as a tsunobi. It is the blade in its roughest form. It has the correct length, the basic cross-sectional geometry, and the beginnings of a tip. But it is not a finished sword, not by a long shot. The surfaces are black with forged scale, pitted with hammer marks. The edges are thick and blunt. It lacks the final, elegant taper from its base to its tip. It is the charcoal sketch, the rough draft, the ghost of the blade that is yet to come. The smith has successfully transformed the laminated block into a sword blank without destroying its internal structure. This iconic shape itself is the subject of a long-standing scholarly debate. Why this specific design? A single-edged curved blade. Did the form follow the function, or did the function follow the form? One side argues that the evolution of Japanese warfare, particularly the rise of cavalry, created a demand for a weapon that was ideal for slashing from horseback. The curved blade is a more effective slicer than a straight one. In this view, the smiths were tasked with a tactical problem, and they developed the metallurgical techniques, lamination and differential hardening, to solve it. The other side argues that the metallurgical process itself dictated the shape. The act of differentially hardening a blade, which you'll see soon, naturally causes it to curve. Perhaps the ancient smiths, working with their unique steel, discovered this property, and the samurai warriors then adapted their fighting style to take advantage of this new, incredibly effective curved weapon. Was it a warrior's demand or a smith's discovery that created the soul of the samurai? The question remains a fascinating chicken or egg problem in the history of weaponry. For now, the smith's work at the forge is done. He has shaped the body. The next step will be to prepare its soul for its final fiery baptism. The forge is quiet now, the fire banked to a soft, sleeping glow. The heavy percussive rhythm of the hammer is gone, replaced by a much finer, more meticulous sound. The whisper of metal on metal. The rough, fire-blackened tsunobi you saw created is now lying on a wooden bench. Before its soul can be prepared for baptism, its body must be refined. The smith takes up a series of tools, scrapers and coarse files, and begins the laborious process of shiage, the final shaping. He is removing the black forged scale and the hammer marks, revealing the clean, gray steel beneath. He is defining the crisp lines, the shinogi, that form the ridges of the blade, and refining the geometry of the tip. This is painstaking, unglamorous work. It's the metallurgical equivalent of sanding drywall before you paint. It's tedious. It creates a horrible screeching sound, and if you don't do it perfectly, the final result will look awful. The smith works with an unwavering focus, his hands steady, his eyes scanning every inch of the blade's surface. He is ensuring that the planes are perfectly flat. The curves are flawlessly smooth, and the thickness tapers just so from the hilt to the tip. Any unevenness here could create a stress point that could cause the blade to warp or crack during the terrifying ordeal that is to come. His movements are precise, born of a muscle memory that has turned a repetitive chore into a form of active meditation. Once the blade is a clean, perfectly shaped canvas of raw steel, the true artistry begins. The smith turns to a simple wooden bucket containing a thick, gray slurry. This is the yakibatsuchi, or edge fire clay, and it is the most critical secret in his arsenal. This isn't just mud. It is a proprietary mixture, a recipe passed down through generations and unique to each school, and often to each individual smith. The basic ingredients are a fine riverbed clay for body, charcoal powder to prevent the blade from overheating, and the powder of a toshi ishi, a polishing stone, which adds silica and helps the clay adhere to the blade. This mixture is the key to one of the most important historical facts of katana construction: differential hardening. The clay acts as an insulator. When the hot blade is plunged into water, the parts covered by a thick layer of clay will cool slowly, while the parts with a thin layer will cool almost instantly. You watch as the smith begins to paint the blade with this special mud. He uses a small spatula, but often just his fingers, applying the clay with the focus of a calligrapher. He coats the entire blade in a thin, uniform base layer first. Then he begins to build it up. Along the spine and the middle sections of the blade, the parts that need to remain tough and flexible, he applies a thick, heavy coat, sometimes 1/4 of an inch thick. This thick coat will slow the cooling, ensuring the steel there forms a softer, more shock-absorbent structure known as perlite. This will be the blade's resilient backbone. Then, he turns his attention to the edge. Here his touch becomes incredibly delicate. He uses a fine tool to scrape away most of the clay along the blade's edge, leaving only a very thin, almost translucent wash. And he doesn't just scrape it in a straight line. He creates a pattern. It might be a gentle rolling wave, a series of regular half circles, or a chaotic, cloud-like pattern. This design is his signature, his artistic fingerprint. This thin layer of clay is what will define the Hamon, the beautiful, visible temper line that is the most famous feature of a Japanese sword. He is, quite literally, painting with fire and time. He's like the Bob Ross of metallurgy, painting happy little clouds of future martensitic crystal structures. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky and slightly mystical aspect of these secret clay recipes. While the core ingredients were known, many smiths were said to have added their own secret touches. Legends and old texts hint at the addition of powdered deer antlers for toughness, iron oxides for color, or even the ash of certain sacred herbs, all believed to bestow unique properties upon the finished blade. Historians still argue whether these intricate, beautiful Hamon patterns were initially just a functional byproduct of applying the clay to achieve a hard edge, or if they quickly evolved into a primarily aesthetic pursuit. Did smiths create complex, choppy mid-air patterns because they believed it made the edge more durable? Or did they do it because it was beautiful, a way to showcase their skill and artistry to rival smiths and wealthy patrons? Once the clay is applied to his satisfaction, the most delicate part of this stage begins: drying it. The blade, now looking like a gray, lifeless chrysalis, is held carefully over the gentle heat of the forge. The smith rotates it constantly, warming it just enough to slowly bake the clay hard. If he heats it too fast, the moisture could turn to steam and make the clay flake off. If any moisture remains hidden within, it could flash into steam during the quench, creating a tiny explosion that would either blow a piece of clay off, creating a soft spot on the edge, or worse, cause the blade itself to crack. The tension is palpable. After weeks or months of work, everything now rides on this delicate shell of mud. He holds the clay-coated blade up, tapping it gently. It gives a clear, dry ring. It is ready. The blade lies prepared, its fate sealed in a fragile earthen coat. All the artistry, all the science, all the preparation has led to this. The next step is a single moment of terrifying, irreversible violence. The forge has grown dark. Night has fallen on the mountain, and the only light now comes from the soft glow of the forge fire, which the smith is carefully rebuilding. The air, once filled with the screech of files, is now thick with a heavy, almost sacred silence. All the weeks, perhaps months of work, the search for sand, the ordeal of the tatara, the meditative folding, the violent shaping, and the delicate painting with clay have all converged on this single, terrifying moment. Everything can be lost in the next 10 seconds. It is a level of pressure that makes waiting for a reply to a very risky text message feel like a relaxing spa day. Before you stands a large wooden trough filled with water, the mizubachi. It's just a simple tub of water. But tonight, it is an executioner and a god of judgment. The smith approaches it, his face a mask of unreadable concentration. He dips his hand in, not to test the temperature in a way you or I would, but with a reverence, as if asking for its permission. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky and mysterious aspect of the quench, the water itself. The exact temperature of the quenching water was a smith's most closely guarded secret. Old traditions say it had to be as cold as the water in February, a poetic but frustratingly vague instruction. The smith is judging this by feel, a sensory calibration passed down through generations. With a final silent nod, he turns back to the fire. He takes the clay-encased blade, the product of all his labor, and holds it out. This is the yaki-ire, the insertion into the fire, the final hardening. He doesn't just thrust the sword into the charcoal. He holds it above the flames, passing it back and forth, slowly and evenly, to bring the entire length up to a preheat temperature. Then, he lowers it, edge down, into the heart of the fire. The apprentice pumps the bellows and the fire roars to life, enveloping the blade. The smith's eyes are locked onto the thin line of the edge, where the steel is visible through the thinnest layer of clay. He is watching for a very specific color. This is the critical science, the central historical fact of the process. He needs to heat the steel to a precise temperature, around 750 to 800 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, the steel's crystal structure transforms into a state called austenite, where the iron and carbon atoms are dissolved into a uniform, solid solution. He knows he has reached this state not by a gauge but by color. He is looking for a glow that matches the color of the rising sun or the full moon in winter, a specific shade of luminous reddish-orange that his master taught him to recognize. Heat it too little, and the steel won't harden. Heat it too much, and the crystal grain will grow too large, making the blade brittle and weak. The color arrives. For a fraction of a second, the edge glows with the perfect, otherworldly light. The smith's body tenses. In one impossibly swift and fluid motion, he pulls the blade from the fire and pivots toward the water trough. There is no hesitation. There is no second guessing. The moment he decides, the action is already complete. He raises the sword high, its glowing edge a streak of dawn against the darkness, and plunges it, edge first, into the water. The world explodes. A violent roaring hiss erupts as the 1,000-degree steel meets the cold water. A massive cloud of steam billows up, momentarily obscuring the smith and filling the forge with the smell of hot metal and flash-boiled water. The water in the trough boils and churns as if a monster has been unleashed within it. This is thermal shock on an almost unimaginable scale. The rapid cooling, a drop of over 700 degrees in less than a second, is what gives the blade its life. The steel at the thinly clayed edge, cooled almost instantly, is locked into a new crystal structure. The carbon atoms don't have time to escape, and they are trapped, creating an incredibly hard, needle-like structure called martensite. This is the source of the katana's legendary sharpness. Meanwhile, the thick clay on the spine insulates the steel, forcing it to cool much more slowly, allowing it to form a softer, tougher structure of pearlite and ferrite. The smith holds the blade steady in the water, his arms rigid against the violent vibrations traveling up the steel. And here, we must ask the question that historians still argue over. What did the smith believe was happening in that moment of steam and fury? Did he have a proto-scientific understanding that he was manipulating the grain or nature of the steel? Or was his understanding entirely spiritual? Did he believe he was trapping the fiery spirit of the god Kagutsuchi in the edge of the blade by plunging it into the realm of the water kami? Was he performing metallurgy? Or was he performing a miracle, forcing warring gods to coexist in a single piece of steel? The answer is lost to time, but the result is the same. The blade is now cooling in the water, the violent hissing subsiding to a gentle simmer. Its soul has been forged. But whether that soul is perfect or fatally flawed is a secret still hidden beneath the water's surface. The violent hiss of steam subsides, leaving an echoing silence in the forge. The cloud of vapor begins to clear, and you see the smith standing rigid, the blade still submerged in the now simmering water. He holds it there for a few moments longer, a silent count passing through his mind, allowing the transformation within the steel to complete itself. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that seems to stretch time, he lifts the sword from the trough. Water streams from its length, and as it emerges into the dim firelight, you see something that makes you question your own eyes. It's a miracle. The blade he plunged into the water was perfectly, stubbornly straight. The one he holds now, dripping and dark, possesses a graceful, elegant curve. It bent itself. This is the magic, the beautiful, almost unbelievable climax of the Yaki ire. The sword is born with its own will, taking on its iconic shape in a moment of intense physical stress. There were no presses, no jigs, no hammering it around a curved form. The curve, is the physical manifestation of the war that just took place within the steel. It's the result of a brilliant, deliberate piece of applied physics, a process so elegant it feels like alchemy. It's certainly more reliable than trying to build a piece of flat-pack furniture, where following the instructions perfectly somehow results in a bookshelf that curves in 3 different directions at once. Let's break down what you just witnessed. When the smith plunged the glowing, straight blade into the water, The thin layer of clay on the edge allowed for near instantaneous cooling. This shock cooling forced the steel at the edge to transform into that hard, needle-like structure called martensite. Here is the key. Martensite is a more voluminous crystal structure than the austenite it transformed from. In simple terms, the edge steel expanded. At this exact moment, the spine of the blade, protected by its thick coat of insulating clay, was still red-hot, soft, and ductile. So, as the edge rapidly expanded, it stretched the still pliable spine, forcing the whole blade into a slight backward curve away from the edge. This is a temporary, reverse curve called uchi-sori, but the process wasn't over. For the next few seconds, while the edge was locked in its new expanded state, the spine continued to cool, but much more slowly. As it cooled, its steel transformed not into martensite, but into the softer, tougher structures of pearlite and ferrite. And here's the second key. These structures are less voluminous. They are denser. So as the spine cooled from red-hot to black, it contracted and shrank. This powerful contraction along the back of the blade pulled the entire sword forward, overcoming that initial reverse bend and creating the final, graceful curve towards the edge. The blade literally created itself in a high-stakes tug-of-war between the expanding edge and the contracting spine. It's the kind of internal stress that makes arguments over the dinner table at Thanksgiving seem pretty manageable. This naturally formed curve is a central historical fact of the katana, and its specific shape is a fingerprint of its era. Early swords from the Kamakura period, designed for cavalry, often had a deep curve near the hilt, known as koshi-zori, which was perfect for a powerful drawing slash from horseback. In later periods, as fighting shifted more to infantry, the deepest point of the curve often moved toward the center of the blade, a shape called tori-zori. A knowledgeable historian can look at the curve of a blade and tell you, with reasonable accuracy, when and for what purpose it was made. The smith holds the blade up, steam still ghosting from its surface. He listens. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky poetic belief among smiths. Some masters claimed that a perfectly hardened blade would emit a faint, high-pitched ringing sound as it cooled, a sort of crystalline music as the steel settled into its new form. This was the blade's first cry, its ubugo, the same word used for a newborn baby's first cry. It was the sound of a successful birth. As the blade cools, flakes of the gray clay begin to crack and fall away, offering the first tantalizing glimpse of the hardened edge and the swirling, cloud-like pattern of the Hamon beneath. The smith is scanning every millimeter of the blade, his eyes searching for the faintest hairline fracture, the smallest warp or twist. The debate among scholars and modern smiths continues. How much control did the ancient master really have over this final, beautiful curve? Was he a perfect conductor, using the thickness of his clay, the temperature of his fire, and the warmth of his water to dictate the exact degree of sori to within a fraction of an inch? Or was he more of a supplicant, preparing the blade as best he could, and then surrendering the final result to the gods of fire and water, accepting the beautiful, semi-random curve they chose to bestow? The truth is likely somewhere in between, a partnership between absolute skill and a profound respect for the beautiful chaos of nature. The curve is there, the blade is born, but the danger is not over yet. The newborn soul is still incredibly fragile. The newborn blade is held in the smith's hands, its elegant curve a perfect silhouette against the forge's soft light. The cracked gray shell of clay continues to fall away, revealing the steel beneath. You can see it now. The ghostly cloud-like line of the Hamon is visible, a shimmering boundary between the dark, pearly spine and the pale, almost white edge. It is a masterpiece. The curve is flawless. The pattern is beautiful. The smith has navigated 1,000 hidden dangers and brought this creation to the very brink of perfection. He turns it over, his eyes scanning every inch, his expression still a mask of intense, unreadable focus. He holds it up to his ear, listening for its song, its first cry. And then you hear it. It's not the clear, crystalline ring of a baby's cry. It's a faint, sharp tink. It's a sound so small, so insignificant, that you almost miss it. But the smith doesn't. His entire body goes rigid. It's the sound of a window getting a stone chip on the highway. A sound that means everything is about to go wrong. It's the echo of a broken heart. He lowers the blade and holds it closer to the light. And there, running like a tiny frozen lightning bolt from the edge into the body of the blade, is a hairline crack. It's a hagire, a fatal flaw. The blade is dead. All of it. The months of labor, the gathering of the sand, the 3-day ordeal of the tatara, the 15 meditative folds, the careful lamination, the painstaking shaping, the secret clay, the terrifying quench. All of it has just been reduced to nothing, to a piece of scrap metal. The internal stresses created during the quench were simply too great for the steel to bear. The tug of war between the expanding edge and the contracting spine was too violent, and something, somewhere, gave way. The smith's face shows no anger, no frustration, just a quiet, profound stillness. A level of stoic acceptance you can only dream of achieving the next time your internet connection drops for more than 30 seconds. This heartbreaking failure is a central historical fact of Japanese swordsmithing. The yaki ire was a brutal filter, a final exam that a shocking number of blades simply did not pass. Even for a master smith, failure was a constant and expected companion. Some historical sources and modern reconstructions suggest that the failure rate could be as high as 30%, or even higher for less experienced smiths. Imagine 1 out of every 3 projects you pour your heart and soul into for months, just spontaneously self-destructing at the final moment. It is a testament to the immense difficulty of the craft and the almost supernatural reverence held for a blade that actually survived the ordeal. Why did it fail? The reasons are a ghost haunting every step of the process you've witnessed. Perhaps there was a microscopic pocket of slag, a tiny bit of dross that wasn't hammered out during the folding, which created a weak point. Maybe an air bubble was trapped during the lamination of the core and skin, a tiny flaw that blossomed into a catastrophic crack under pressure. It could have been an uneven application of the clay, or a spot that flaked off in the fire, causing one section to cool a fraction of a second faster than the rest. The blade was essentially ghosted by perfection at the very last moment. The warranty is now and forever void. The smith carries the blade to the anvil. Its curve is beautiful, its Hamon is ghostly and ethereal, but it is a lie. It's a beautiful failure. This brings us to a wonderfully poignant and quirky ritual. A failed blade wasn't just tossed into a scrap pile. It was a stillborn creation, and it was treated with a strange kind of reverence. The smith places the flawed section of the blade over the edge of the anvil and, with a single sharp blow from his hammer, he breaks it in 2. The sharp crack echoes in the silent forge. He is giving it a ceremonial death. Often these broken shards would be taken to a local shrine and buried in the earth, returning the metal to the kami of the mountain from which its sand was first taken. Historians still argue whether the legendary smiths like Masamune or Muramasa owed their fame primarily to a genuinely superior secret technique that resulted in a much lower failure rate, or if their legendary status was also a product of their patronage and resources. A wealthy patron could afford for a smith to fail. Did Masamune succeed because he was a magician who never made a cracked blade? Or because he was a master craftsman with a sponsor who allowed him to make 10 blades bury the 3 that failed, and only sell the 7 that were absolutely perfect? This economic reality is a fascinating layer to the smith's mystique. For now, this particular journey is over. There is no polishing, no mounting. Only the quiet echo of a single fatal tink. The smith gathers the broken pieces, his face betraying nothing. After a moment of silence, he turns, cleans his tools, and prepares the forge. He will begin again. Tomorrow. That sharp final tink of the failed blade still echoes in your mind. The image of the smith, his face a stoic mask as he breaks his own creation, is a powerful lesson in acceptance. But for every blade that is born flawed, there are others that emerge from the water screaming and perfect. Let us leave the ghost of that broken blade to its rest and turn our attention to one of its siblings, a blade that survived the ordeal. It emerged from the water with a flawless curve and a soul of hard martensite. The smith has performed one final, gentle task: tempering. He has carefully warmed the blade over the fire one last time to a very low temperature. just enough to relieve some of the brittleness from the edge without sacrificing its hardness. His work is now done. The soul is forged, but it is not yet visible. The blade leaves the smoky, fiery sanctuary of the smith and travels to a different kind of workshop. You follow it. This new space is clean, quiet, and bright with natural light. There are no anvils, no hammers, no roaring fire. The air smells not of charcoal and hot metal, but of cool water, damp stone, and a faint, clean mineral scent. Instead of a master of fire, you find a master of water. This is the realm of the togashi, the sword polisher. He is a man defined by a singular virtue: patience. He sits in a low posture, his focus as intense as the smith's, but his energy is entirely different. It is not the explosive, creative energy of the forge, but a slow, reductive, meditative energy of revelation. The blade arrives as an ugly duckling. It survived the quench, yes. It has its curve and its hardened edge, but it's still coated in patches of baked-on clay and black scale. The surface is a dull, lifeless gray. The elegant lines are there, but they are obscured. The Hamon is a faint, ghostly suggestion, like a breath on a cold window. The blade is hard, it is whole, but it is mute. It has a story to tell, but its pages are sealed shut. The polisher's job is to open the book. This is a crucial historical fact. The polisher was a separate, highly specialized, and deeply respected artisan. Forging and polishing were two distinct arts. The smith creates the potential, the polisher realizes it. The process of polishing a single blade could take weeks, sometimes even longer than the forging itself, and a good polish could cost as much as the blade. Before the togishi are his tools, not hammers and tongs, but stones. Dozens and dozens of water stones, the toishi. They are arranged in a neat, obsessive row, from large, coarse blocks that look like rough pieces of sidewalk to small, smooth stones that feel like silk. Each stone has a name, a specific purpose, and comes from a specific quarry in Japan. This is a palette of textures, an arsenal of abrasion. It makes that one combination whetstone you have in your kitchen for sharpening your sad, dull chef's knife look a bit inadequate. The polisher's entire art is in knowing the precise sequence of these stones required to bring a blade to life. The work begins. The polisher sits low over a wooden tub, a constant trickle of water flowing over his stone. He takes the blade and starts with the coarsest stone, the areto. The sound is a harsh, grating scrape. This is not about making it shiny yet. This is brutal, geometric work. He is grinding away the last of the forge scale and the surface imperfections from the quench, but more importantly, he is establishing the final, perfect geometry of the blade. He is making the planes perfectly flat, the ridge lines, the shinogi, razor sharp and straight. It's the meticulous work of a sculptor, using controlled abrasion to reveal the form that the smith sketched out with his hammer. After the foundation is set, he moves to a series of progressively finer stones. The harsh, scraping sound softens to a whispery shh, the sound of steel being caressed into perfection. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky and obsessive detail of the craft, the final stages of the polish. For the most detailed work, the polisher uses stones called hazuya and jizuya. These are cut into tiny paper-thin wafers, which he meticulously glues to a paper backing. He then uses only the tip of his thumb to push these tiny stone wafers across the surface of the blade, bringing out the most subtle details in the hamon and the grain of the steel. It's a level of painstaking, microscopic detail that makes assembling a ship in a bottle seem like a casual, large motor skill activity. With each new stone, a new layer of the sword's story is revealed. The coarse scratches from the previous stone are erased, replaced by a finer, more uniform pattern. The dull gray of the steel begins to acquire a deep, liquid luster, and now, the magic happens. The Hamon, that ghostly line, begins to burn its way into visibility. The area of the hardened edge becomes a brilliant, frosty white, while the softer body of the blade takes on a deeper, darker hue. And within the body of the blade, another pattern emerges, the Hada, or the grain. Those 16,000 layers you witnessed being folded into the steel are now becoming visible as a subtle, shimmering pattern, resembling fine wood grain or flowing water. The polisher isn't creating this. He is excavating it. He is a patient archaeologist, brushing away the dust to reveal the hidden city within the steel. Historians still argue whether the greatest polishers were merely faithful servants to the smith's vision, or if they were co-creators in their own right. Did a master Togishi use his unique sequence of stones and polishing techniques simply to reveal what the smith forged, or did he make artistic choices subtly altering the contrast and texture to enhance the blade's beauty according to his own aesthetic? Was he a perfect photographer, capturing the soul of the blade, or was he a master painter, adding his own interpretation to it? The polisher's work is a testament to the idea that true beauty is not applied but revealed. He has ground away the shadows, and in their place he has found light. The polisher sets the finished blade on a silk cloth. The transformation is absolute. The dull gray object that entered this quiet room has vanished, and in its place lies something that seems to have a light of its own. It is a sliver of the winter sky, a captured river of moonlight. The weeks of patient, abrasive work have stripped away all the grit and grime of its creation, and now you can see its soul. You are no longer looking at a tool or a weapon, you are looking at a landscape. The polisher has not just sharpened the blade, he has taught it how to speak, and now you must learn to read its language. Your eyes are first drawn to the most dramatic feature, the Hamon. It's the boundary line between the hardened edge and the softer spine, but line is an insultingly simple word for it. It is a complex, ethereal weather pattern frozen in steel. The edge itself, the yakiba, has a brilliant, frosty white appearance, while the body of the blade, the ji, is a deeper, darker gray. The Hamon is the shore where these two seas meet. In this particular blade, it's a gentle, undulating wave pattern, a style known as notare. This is a key historical fact. These patterns were not random. They were deliberate artistic choices, and different schools and smiths had their signature styles. A straight hamon or suguha was considered elegant and classical. A regular rolling wave was gunome. A chaotic, disordered pattern was mid-air. Each one required a different, masterful application of the secret clay. You lean closer, and the landscape resolves into even finer detail. The boundary of the Hamon isn't a sharp line. It's a misty, cloudy transition, an effect called nioi, which translates to scent or aroma as if it were a perfume you can almost see. And sprinkled within that misty line, like individual stars in the Milky Way, are tiny, glittering crystals of martensite. These are called ni, which means boiling, because they look like tiny, frozen bubbles. A blade is judged by the quality of its nie and nioi, by how the light plays across these microscopic features. It's a level of aesthetic appreciation that makes judging an Instagram photo based on its filter choice seem a little superficial. Then, you lift your gaze from the shoreline of the Hamon and look deeper into the body of the blade. At first, it just looks like dark, lustrous steel. But as you tilt the blade in the light, a new pattern emerges, a subtle, shimmering ghost within the metal. This is the Hada, or skin. This is the visible soul of the 16,000 layers. You are seeing the result of the smith's meditative folding, a history of his hammer written in the grain of the steel. The repeated stretching and folding created a topography, and the polisher's stones have cut a cross-section through it, revealing the layers like the rings of a tree or the grain in a piece of fine wood. On this blade, it looks like a subtle, swirling burl wood pattern called mokumi hada. Another blade might have itami hada, a looser wood grain, or masame hada, a straight, running grain. This is the art of kante, or sword appraisal, a quirky and deeply respected discipline. A true master connoisseur, by examining the shape of the blade, the color of the steel, the style of the Hamon, and the pattern of the Hada, could identify not just the era in which a sword was made, but the specific province, the school of the smith, and sometimes even the individual master who forged it. They were reading the blade's DNA. They developed a rich, poetic vocabulary to describe what they saw. Features in the Hamon were called legs, threads, or sandy streams, while the activity of the NIE might be described as falling stars or islands in the sky. It was a language of pure, focused beauty. The question that historians and connoisseurs still argue over is the relationship between this beauty and the blade's function. Was the development of these incredibly complex and beautiful patterns purely an aesthetic arms race between competing schools of smiths, a way to show off their skill to wealthy samurai and daimyo? Or did they believe these features were the outward expression of the blade's inner strength? For example, did a smith create a complex fiery Hamon because he believed it made the edge more resistant to chipping, or did he simply create it because it was breathtakingly beautiful, and that beauty itself was a mark of a divine creation? Was a blade with a perfect wood grain pattern considered superior because the grain showed the steel was well worked and pure, or because it was aesthetically pleasing? It's the ultimate debate of form versus function, trying to untangle the practical from the poetic in an art where the two seem to be one and the same. You hold the blade, its weight feeling solid and real in your hands. It is no longer just a bar of steel. You see the river sand and the dark grain of the Hada. You see the 3-day fire of the tatara and the brilliant stars of the Nai. You see the smith's patient hand and the rolling waves of the Hamon. The polisher hasn't just made it beautiful, he has made it legible. He has revealed the story that was folded and hammered and burned into its very essence. You have learned to read its soul, a soul forged not just of iron and carbon, but of a deep, abiding spirituality. You hold the finished blade, its landscape of steel whispering stories of fire, water, and stone. You've traced its physical journey from a grain of sand to this object of breathtaking beauty and lethal potential. But to truly understand it, to feel the full weight of its existence, you have to look beyond the metallurgy. You have to look at the invisible forces the smith believed were guiding his hand at every moment. You have to go back to the forge, not as a workshop, but as a temple. The perfection you see in the steel was, in the smith's eyes, not just a result of his skill, but a sign of divine favor. Without the blessing of the gods, the blade would have been born dead. Every step you have witnessed was steeped in a deep and abiding spirituality, a native belief system called Shinto, the way of the gods. For the swordsmith, this wasn't a hobby he practiced on the weekend. It was the very air he breathed, the invisible architecture of his craft. Remember the simple thatched roof structure? It was more than a workshop. Hanging from the eaves were the shimenawa, thick ropes of woven rice straw with white paper streamers. You see these at Shinto shrines all over Japan. They are markers, delineating a sacred space from the mundane world. By hanging them on his forge, the smith was declaring his workshop a holy site, a place where mortals could commune with the gods, or kami. This brings us to a central historical fact. The master swordsmith was not just an artisan. He was, in many ways, a priest. Before beginning the forging of an important blade, he would undergo days of ritual purification. He would perform misogi, a practice of cleansing himself by standing under a waterfall or pouring buckets of cold water over his body. Even in the dead of winter, he would wear clean, simple white robes, the color of purity. He would adhere to a strict diet, sometimes fasting, and would abstain from alcohol and sexual activity. He was trying to make his body and mind a pure vessel, worthy of channeling the divine power needed to create the sword's soul. It's a level of dedication that makes your New Year's resolution to go to the gym twice a week seem a little less ambitious. Inside the forge, in a place of honor, was the kamidana, the god shelf. This small household shrine was the focal point of the smith's daily worship. Every morning before touching a tool, he would pray there, making offerings of rice, water, and salt. He would pray to the great sun goddess Amaterasu, the mythical ancestor of the emperor. But more specifically, he would pray to his craft's own patron deity. This is the quirky and fascinating part. The pantheon of Shinto gods included a specific kami for blacksmiths, a deity named Kanayago no Kami. Legends say this god descended from heaven on a dog and taught humanity the secrets of the bellows and the art of forging. The smith's prayers were intensely personal, asking this specific god for guidance, for a steady hand, and for protection against the failures that haunted his every move. The rituals extended to every aspect of the work. The fire was not just a source of heat, it was a living spirit. The water in the quenching trough was not just a cooling agent, it was the embodiment of a powerful water kami. Even the tools were believed to house spirits. This is why they were treated with such reverence, cleaned meticulously, and never carelessly tossed aside. The smith was surrounded by a world of invisible partners. His job was to maintain harmony between them all. This led to a whole host of superstitions. For example, during the most critical stages like the final quench, no one else was allowed to even look into the forge. An outsider's gaze could bring bad luck, and in many traditional forges, women were strictly forbidden from entering at all. A divine no girls allowed policy based on ancient taboos associating menstruation and childbirth with a spiritual impurity that could offend the forge gods and ruin the steel. Historians and anthropologists still argue whether these extensive Shinto rituals were purely a manifestation of profound religious belief, or if they also served a vital psychological function. The process of making a katana is one of unforgiving sequential precision. A single moment of distraction, a brief lapse in concentration, can undo months of labor. In this light, the rituals, the purification, the prayers, the sacred isolation, can be seen as a powerful system of mental conditioning. They force the smith into a state of extreme mindfulness and focus, the exact mental state required to perform his incredibly demanding work. Did the smith pray because he was devout, or was he devout because praying made him a better smith? Perhaps the question itself is a modern error. For him, the two were likely one and the same. So when you look at the blade now, you see it differently. Its flawlessness is not just a triumph of metallurgy, but a sign that the kami were pleased. The blade itself could be considered a shintai, a physical object worthy of housing a divine spirit. This is why the greatest swords were given names, revered, and sometimes even worshipped. They were not just things. They were beings. They were born from a union of the four elements, the earth of the sand, the water of the quench, the air of the bellows, and the fire of the forge, all brought into harmony through the fifth element, the pure, focused spirit of the smith acting as a humble servant to the gods. The blade in your hands is heavy with more than just steel. It feels weighted with the spirit of the forge, the blessing of the kami. This spiritual significance is the key that unlocks the sword's ultimate role, a role that transcends the simple, brutal reality of a sharpened piece of metal. It explains how this object evolved from a mere tool of war into the very soul of a culture. For the samurai, the katana was not a thing they owned. It was a physical extension of their identity, a manifestation of their honor. But it didn't start that way. Its journey to becoming a symbol began on the bloody battlefields of feudal Japan. Let's rewind to the 13th century. You're standing on a beach in Hakata Bay. The air is thick with the smell of salt, blood, and fear. On the horizon, you see a forest of masts, the invasion fleets of Kublai Khan. The Mongol invasions of Japan are a pivotal historical fact that had a profound impact on the evolution of the sword. The samurai, with their traditional fighting styles and elegant blades, were faced with a new kind of enemy. The Mongols used different tactics, wore different armor, often hardened leather, and fought with a ferocity that shocked the Japanese warriors. The samurai discovered, to their horror, that their graceful swords would sometimes chip or even break against the invaders' tough armor. This crisis spurred a revolution in sword making. Smiths were forced to innovate, developing blades with thicker, stronger bodies and more robust tips designed for piercing. The elegant art piece had to remember how to be a brutally effective weapon of war. But as the centuries passed, the constant civil wars of the Sengoku period finally give way to the iron-fisted peace of the Tokugawa shogunate, beginning in the early 1600s. Suddenly, Japan is a unified, stable country. The samurai, once a class of full-time warriors, now find themselves as a ruling aristocracy of bureaucrats, administrators, and law enforcement. The great battles are over, and when a warrior has no wars to fight, what becomes of his weapon? It becomes a symbol. The katana evolved from a tool for survival into a badge of office. It became the most powerful status symbol in the country. The right to wear the daisho, the matched pair of a long katana and a short companion sword, the wakizashi, was the exclusive privilege of the samurai class. A farmer or a merchant could be executed on the spot for even touching a samurai's sword without permission. It was the ultimate expression of the phrase, "Check your privilege." This leads to a wonderfully quirky and intricate system of sword etiquette. a complex dance of unspoken rules that governed how a samurai interacted with his blades. When a samurai entered a friend's home, he would remove his long katana. But how he did so was a message. He would hold it out with his right hand, the hilt facing the host, a sign of trust. The host would receive it with similar reverence and place it on a special rack, the katana kake. The short wakizashi was almost never removed, as it was considered the guardian of its owner's honor. When sitting, a samurai would place his sheathed katana on the floor to his right. This made it difficult to draw quickly, and it signaled to everyone in the room that he had peaceful intentions. If he placed it on his left, within easy reach of his right hand, it was a subtle but clear sign of distrust, an unspoken warning that he was ready for trouble. A social gathering could turn into a high-stakes standoff, based on nothing more than where a guy put his sword. As the long peace of the Edo period stretched on for over 250 years, this symbolic function began to eclipse the sword's practical one. With no major wars to test them in, swords were judged less on their performance and more on their beauty. They became objects of connoisseurship, of high art. Wealthy daimyo, lords of great provinces, became patrons of the greatest smiths, commissioning blades not for their armies, but for their personal collections. The focus shifted to the perfection of the polish, the breathtaking beauty of the Hamon, and the subtle, elegant grain of the Hada. The blade became a canvas. This shift in focus is the subject of a deep and fascinating scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the extreme artistic refinement of swords during the peaceful Edo period was a sign of a martial culture in decline, a warrior class that had lost its purpose and was now sublimating its violent instincts into aesthetics. In this view, the art sword is a decadent object, a beautiful but ultimately hollow echo of its true functional purpose. The other side argues that this was not a decline, but the ultimate expression of the samurai ideal. The concept of bunbu ryodo, the pen and the sword in accord, held that a true warrior should be both a fierce martial artist and a refined scholar and poet. In this light, a sword that was both a peerless weapon and a work of profound beauty was the perfect embodiment of this philosophy. It was the final synthesis of the lethal and the sublime. Was the art sword a sign of a culture losing its edge, or the sign of a culture that had finally perfected it? The blade you hold is a product of this long, complex evolution. It was born from the desperate needs of the battlefield, became the ultimate symbol of a ruling class, and was finally elevated to the status of high art. It is a weapon that can take a life, a badge that can define a life, and a work of art that can give meaning to a life all at the same time. It is history, society, and spirit, all folded into steel. You're holding this blade, a vessel of Shinto spirituality, a symbol of samurai identity, a masterpiece of metallurgical art. But there's another spirit folded into the steel alongside the kami of the mountain and the fire, the spirit of the maker himself. In the world of Japanese swords, the smith was not an anonymous craftsman. He was an artist, and like any great artist, his personality, his philosophy, and his very soul were believed to be imprinted upon his work. No two smiths illustrate this more dramatically, more poetically, than the two titans whose names have transcended history and become legend, Masamune and Muramasa. They are the light and the shadow of the sword-making world. First, you must imagine Goro Nudo Masamune. He is the Shakespeare of Japanese swordsmiths, the undisputed Grand Master who worked during the late Kamakura period, that golden age of innovation you saw fueled by the Mongol invasions. Masamune is not just revered, he is practically deified. His surviving works are considered national treasures, priceless artifacts of a skill that has never been surpassed. The legends that surround him paint a picture of a man of profound calm, of deep spiritual balance. His blades are said to reflect his character. They are described as being serene, noble, and inherently protective. A Masamune blade, it was said, was a work of art that embodied the highest ideals of the samurai. Strength held in perfect, virtuous control. It wouldn't just cut, it would defend. It was a guardian in steel form. Now you must imagine Sengo Muramasa. He worked much later during the chaotic, blood-soaked Sengoku period, the Warring States era. This was a time of constant betrayal, of ruthless ambition. when a samurai's sword was not a symbol of status but a tool of daily survival. Muramasa was an undisputed master, a smith of genius-level skill. But his reputation is the polar opposite of Masamune's. His blades were famous, or rather infamous, for one thing above all: their terrifying, almost supernatural sharpness, their kiriaji. The legends say Muramasa was a man of immense talent, but also of a violent, unstable, and half-mad temperament. And his blades, the stories claim, inherited his madness. They were not guardians, they were predators. They were said to be demonic, bloodthirsty, and to possess a malevolent will of their own. This brings us to the most famous story that contrasts the two masters, a perfect piece of folklore. The legend tells of a challenge to determine whose sword was superior. A Muramasa blade and a Masamune blade were suspended in a stream, with their edges facing the current. The Muramasa blade, true to its nature, was an indiscriminate killer. Every leaf, every twig, every unfortunate fish that drifted into its path was sliced in two instantly. It cut everything it touched. Then, the observers turned to the Masamune blade. The floating leaves seemed to drift around it. The fish swam right up to the edge and then turned away unharmed. The blade cut nothing. At first glance, Muramasa seemed the victor, but a wandering monk who had been watching explained the true meaning. The Muramasa was a work of evil, a bloodthirsty sword that did not care what it cut. The Masamune, however, was a truly fine sword, for it did not need to cut. Its inherent virtue, its compassionate soul, repelled violence and protected all life. This demonic reputation of Muramasa's blades became a self-fulfilling prophecy, and here we find a fascinating historical fact. The Tokugawa clan, which eventually unified Japan and established the Long Peace, had a terrible history with Muramasa blades. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the first shogun, saw his grandfather and father both killed or wounded by them. He himself was injured by one, and when his own son was ordered to commit ritual suicide, the blade used for the beheading was, you guessed it, a Muramasa. Believing the blades were cursed and brought ruin to his family, Ieyasu banned them. This was the ultimate product recall. But this act of prohibition only cemented the legend. Samurai who were opposed to the Tokugawa shogunate actively sought out Muramasa blades, believing their demonic power could help overthrow the government. Owning one became a political statement, a mark of rebellion. So where did this dark reputation truly come from? Historians still argue whether the evil legend of Muramasa was a genuine folk belief that arose because his blades were so incredibly wickedly sharp that they were prone to causing accidental injuries, or if it was a calculated political smear campaign orchestrated by the Tokugawa shogunate. By declaring the blades cursed, they could create a powerful pretext for disarming and identifying their enemies who favored them. Was Muramasa a mad genius, whose violent soul infected his steel? Or was he a brilliant craftsman who became the victim of some very effective political propaganda? The contrast is absolute. Masamune is the benevolent master, whose blades are a symbol of peace, control, and the protective duty of the warrior. Muramasa is the demon smith, whose blades are a symbol of uncontrollable violence, of rebellion, and of the weapon's insatiable thirst for blood. One is a prayer in steel, the other a curse. You wouldn't want a Muramasa blade in charge of your finances, that's for sure. The blade in your hand is not just an object, it is a personality, a biography of its creator, frozen at the moment of its fiery birth. You're holding a paradox. In one hand you have the cold, hard science you've learned tonight, the crystal structures of martensite and pearlite, the role of carbon atoms, the physics of thermal expansion and contraction. In the other, you have the deep, abiding spirituality of the Shinto rituals, the legends of demon smiths, and the soul of the samurai. But floating between these two worlds is the mind of the man who created this object. And as you stand there, in the quiet of the polisher's workshop, you have to ask the ultimate question: what did the smith actually know? Did he understand the metallurgy, or did he simply understand the magic? Was he a scientist in craftsman's robes, or was he an artist whose medium just happened to obey the laws of physics? This is the art forged by intuition, and it's one of the most profound debates in the study of this craft. Let's consider the first possibility. that this entire breathtaking process was the result of centuries of accumulated trial and error. Imagine the very first smiths working with this impure, inconsistent Tamahagane. They tried something. Maybe they didn't fold it enough. The resulting blade was brittle and full of slag, and it snapped in its first battle. That smith, if he survived, learned a valuable lesson. The next smith folded it more. The blade was better. That knowledge was passed down not in a textbook but from master to apprentice. A direct, physical transmission of what works. It's like the world's most dangerous beta test, where a critical bug means the user, actually dies. In this view, the smith was the ultimate master of sensory data. He didn't need to know the word austenite. He just knew, with a certainty deeper than any scientific paper, that when the steel glowed with the precise color of the winter moon, it was ready for the water. He didn't need a carbon assay. He could read the story of the steel in the starburst patterns of its sparks. He was a master chef who couldn't write down the chemical formula for the Maillard reaction, but he knew, in his bones, the exact sizzle and smell of a perfect sear. His knowledge wasn't theoretical, it was embodied. It lived in his hands, his eyes, and his ears. This is a crucial historical fact. This knowledge was transmitted almost exclusively through oral tradition, or kuden, and direct observation. The secrets were shown, not told. But then there's the other side of the argument. Were they really just blindly following tradition, like human robots executing a program they didn't understand? Or did they possess their own kind of science, a conceptual framework that was simply expressed in a different language? They spoke of giving the steel bone, shingane, the soft core, and skin, kawagane, the hard exterior. This isn't just poetry. It's a perfectly functional metaphor for a composite material. They described a blade with too much carbon as having too much spirit, making it wild and unpredictable. A blade with too little was lazy or tired. They were describing real metallurgical properties using the language of personality and life force. This brings us to a wonderfully quirky and slightly cloak and dagger aspect of the craft: the secrecy. The most vital knowledge, the precise recipe for the yakiba tsuchi, the secret clay, or the exact temperature of the quenching water, was a hidden, a secret tradition. These secrets were the smith's livelihood. Legends are full of stories of rival apprentices spying on each other, or of masters going to incredible lengths to hide their methods. The recipe for the clay was the original secret 11 herbs and spices, but it was just mud and ash. This intense secrecy suggests that the knowledge was more than just a simple set of instructions. It was a formula, a theory of how to achieve a specific, repeatable result. And that sounds an awful lot like a form of science. So here's the great open question, the one that historians and metallurgists still argue over. Did the great masters possess a genuine, albeit esoteric, metallurgical theory? A coherent system of understanding what was happening inside the steel? Or was their art the absolute pinnacle of a non-theoretical, purely intuitive craft, a perfection achieved without the need for abstract knowledge? The truth, as is often the case, is probably a beautiful, blurry line right down the middle. They were scientists of the senses, artists of the empirical. They built a cathedral of knowledge, but they did it one observed, remembered, and perfectly placed stone at a time, without a formal blueprint. Their intuition was so refined, so practiced, and so deeply ingrained over generations that it became its own kind of science. It was a science you could feel in the vibration of a hammer, a science you could see in a shower of sparks. But this incredible, fragile ecosystem of knowledge held in the minds and hands of a few thousand masters was about to face its greatest threat, not from an invading army, but from the one thing no sword can ever hope to defeat: the future. This entire fragile ecosystem of knowledge, this perfect fusion of science and spirit, had survived for 1,000 years. It weathered civil wars, repelled invasions, and adapted to centuries of peace. It seemed eternal, a craft as timeless as the mountains the iron sand was drawn from. But now you find yourself in a different time. The year is 1876. You are not in a misty mountain forge, but on a bustling, muddy street in the new capital city of Tokyo. The air doesn't smell of charcoal and stone. It smells of coal smoke, of horse-drawn trolleys, and of a bewildering, frantic change. Men in Western-style suits and bowler hats walk alongside men in traditional kimonos, and on a public notice board, a new law has been posted, a decree that will strike at the very heart of everything you have just witnessed. This is the Meiji Restoration, a period of shockingly rapid modernization. After more than 2 centuries of near-total isolation, Japan has been forced open to the world by the arrival of Commodore Perry's American black ships. In a desperate race to avoid being colonized like so much of the rest of Asia, the country is reinventing itself overnight. The old feudal system is being dismantled. The samurai, the warrior class that had ruled for 700 years, are being stripped of their power, their lands, and their purpose, and they are being told to cut their top knots, put away their kimonos, and become businessmen soldiers in a modern conscript army, or government clerks. 1,000 years of tradition is being swept away in a single generation. It's like your quiet, traditional neighborhood suddenly having a 6-lane superhighway built right through the middle of it. And then comes the final, fatal blow. The government issues the High-Torii Edict. This is the central, devastating historical fact of this era. The law forbids anyone, except for active military and police, from wearing swords in public. The daisho, that matched pair of swords you learned was the exclusive badge of the samurai. The very symbol of their soul is now illegal to carry. In a single stroke of a bureaucrat's pen, the entire market for new swords is annihilated. The demand, which had sustained thousands of smiths for centuries, vanishes. It doesn't decline. It simply ceases to exist. The soul of the samurai has been outlawed. The effect on the swordsmiths is catastrophic. Imagine being the world's greatest living expert in a technology that has just been made obsolete. It is as if you were the master of building horse-drawn carriages on the day the first automobile factory opened. The smiths, who were once revered as priestly artisans patronized by powerful lords, are now facing ruin. This leads to the quirky and tragic reality of their struggle to survive. Many of these masters, who could create breathtaking landscapes of folded steel, were forced to turn their incredible skills to making mundane objects. They forged kitchen knives, hocho, scissors, garden tools, and cheap cutlery for the export market. The same hands that once folded the soul of a warrior were now hammering out pruning shears. It was a humiliating, heartbreaking decline. Forges across the country went cold. An untold number of secret traditions the Haiden passed down for generations were lost forever as masters died in poverty, with no apprentices to inherit their knowledge. The art of the Japanese sword was on the verge of total extinction. Then, decades later, a strange reversal begins. The very same government that tried to kill the art begins to recognize it as a unique part of the nation's cultural heritage. But this impulse is complex. Historians still argue whether this revival, which began in the early 20th century, was a genuine act of cultural preservation, a noble effort to save a dying art form from oblivion, or was it something more cynical, intertwined with the rising tide of nationalism and militarism that would eventually lead Japan into World War II? Was the government trying to save a beautiful craft, or was it trying to resurrect a potent symbol of Japanese martial spirit, the Yamato Damashi, to fuel its imperial ambitions? Was the sword being saved as art, or was it being re-weaponized as propaganda? Whatever the motivation, the art did survive, but only just. After World War II, there was another period of prohibition under the American occupation, where swords were confiscated and destroyed by the thousands. But a dedicated group of scholars and enthusiasts successfully argued that the true Japanese sword was a work of art, not a weapon of war. The craft was eventually revived under strict new laws. Today, it is a protected and highly regulated national treasure. A smith must undergo a long, grueling apprenticeship and pass a government exam to be granted a license. He is only allowed to produce 2 long swords per month. The art has been saved from extinction, but it is now an endangered species, a beautiful ghost living in the modern world. The blade has been transformed one last time. No longer a tool of war, no longer a badge of class, it has become something new. A protected relic, a piece of tangible history, a testament to an art that stared into the abyss and somehow survived. The blade, a naked soul of polished steel, finally leaves the quiet sanctuary of the Togishi. Its journey is not quite over. It is passed on to a new set of hands, a final team of craftsmen who will dress it for its life in the world. The sayashi carves a perfectly fitted scabbard, or saya, from light wood, so precisely conformed to the blade's curve that it holds it with a gentle friction, a sigh of a perfect fit. The tsuka makishi wraps the hilt, the tsuka, with panels of rough pebbled stingray skin or samigawa for a secure grip, and then binds it with intricately woven silk cord in a traditional pattern. The choken-shi, a master of metalwork, creates the ornate guard or tsuba and other decorative fittings. This is a final, crucial historical fact. The creation of the complete sword, the koshirai, was a symphony of specialists, an entire ecosystem of artistry that revolved around the smith's central creation. And then, it is finished. It is placed in your hands. You hold it, and the first thing that strikes you is the weight. Not its physical mass, but the gravity of its presence. It feels alive. You draw the blade from its scabbard, the sound of the steel whispering against the wood a soft, final release. You hold it up in the light, and you see it all. In the dark, swirling grain of the Hada, you see the river, the black sand sifted from the cold water by patient hands. You see the dragon's breath furnace, the tatara, and the 3-day fire that transformed that sand into a jewel of raw, chaotic steel. You see the smith's hammer, rising and falling in a meditative dance, folding the steel, squeezing out the dross, mixing the carbon, creating 16,000 layers of history where there was once only one. It's like looking at the compressed geological strata of a cliff face, each layer a memory, a moment in time, an action frozen forever. You tilt the blade and the light catches the frosty white line of the Hamon. You see the smith's hand, painting the secret clay onto the raw steel, his signature written in a wave of mud and ash. You see the terrifying plunge into the water, the explosion of steam, the violent tug of war as the edge expanded and the spine contracted. A war that gave the blade its perfect, self-made curve. Within that misty line you see the glittering stars of Nie, each one a tiny universe of hardness, a testament to the perfect moment of heat and cold. It is a captured sunrise, a frozen storm front. It is the boundary between life and death, forged in an instant and made permanent. This finished object is the center of an endless debate, a question that haunts modern smiths and collectors. Can a blade made today with all our scientific knowledge truly be as good as a masterpiece from the Kamakura period? Modern smiths have access to pure, laboratory-analyzed steel and precise temperature controls. Yet, historians and connoisseurs still argue whether a modern blade can ever truly replicate the soul of an old one. Was there a secret in the old Tamahagane, some unique combination of trace elements from a specific mountain that can never be reproduced? Was there a magic in the old smith's intuition, a non-intellectual, spiritual connection to the material that a modern, scientifically minded craftsman can never achieve? Is it possible that the perfect steel of today is actually too perfect, lacking the subtle, beautiful flaws and character of the old ways? The debate itself is a testament to the mystique of the blade you hold. You look at its perfect form and see not just the smith, but the entire culture that created him. You see the samurai, whose demand for a blade that would not fail him in battle drove 1,000 years of innovation. You see the Shinto priest, blessing the forge and praying to the kami of fire and metal. You see the patient polisher, spending weeks on his knees, grinding away the shadows with water and stone to reveal the light within. You see the lords and shoguns, the artisans and the rebels. You see the near death of the art in the face of modernity, and the quiet, stubborn refusal of a few masters to let the fires go out. A quirky final thought. The very idea that we know so much about this process is a modern miracle. For centuries, this was all a closely guarded secret, and now, here you are, holding the culmination of all those secrets in your hands. You are holding history. You are holding science. You are holding art. You are holding a prayer that was hammered into steel, a piece of the past that has somehow, against all odds, survived to see the light of today. And so, our journey into the fire and the water comes to a quiet close. The blade you have been holding begins to feel less like a physical object and more like a memory, its hard edges softening into the quiet corners of your mind. The rhythmic clang of the hammer on the anvil fades, becoming a distant echo, like a heartbeat slowly settling into the deep rhythm of sleep. The bright, violent flash of the quench, that explosion of steam and hissing fury, now recedes into the gentle darkness, leaving behind only the soft, steady glow of the forge's embers as they prepare for a long and peaceful rest. You can let go of the story now, allowing the intricate details of the Hamon and the swirling grain of the Hada to dissolve into the peaceful, abstract patterns that drift behind your closing eyelids. Let the knowledge you've gathered tonight settle comfortably, not as facts to be remembered, but as a story that has been told, a journey that has reached its final tranquil destination. The forge is quiet, the mountain is still, the spirit in the steel is at peace, and now it's time for you to be at peace too.